Chapter 451, Faceless 15 Minsk Street, in the dank, cold kitchen. Klein rummaged for his newly bought large iron pot, poured fresh water into it, and carefully scrubbed it several times. Then, he dropped some matches into it and snapped his fingers. The scarlet flames soared, and under his control, they quickly burned the remaining water droplets dry, without harming the surface of the pot. This time, there were no ingredients such as pure water in the potion recipe, so Klein was even more careful than the previous 2 times. He wanted to ensure that everything was in good measure to prevent any problems. Although he was able to divine whether the concoction would be successful or not, at least to not endanger his life, such a result could still involve his potion being ineffective. Attempting to extract the Beyonder characteristics from the concoction would be relatively difficult, just like the removal of the mental corruption of a rampager. He would need the corresponding technique, methods, or rituals, and Klein wouldn't be able to gather a second round of ingredients within a short period of time either. After finishing his preparations, Klein took a deep breath as he looked at the neatly arranged boxes. Finally, he recalled the potion recipe: Faceless, main ingredients, mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter, characteristic of a human skin shadow. Supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of a 1,000-faced hunter's blood, 5 drops of black jimsonweed juice, 10 grams of dragon tooth grass powder, 3 strands of hair from a deep-sea naga. He first picked up the cardboard box which came from vampire Emlyn White. He opened the box and took out the glass bottle that contained 100 milliliters of a 1,000-faced hunter's blood. Glancing at the scale, Klein unscrewed the lid and steadily poured the sticky liquid into the pot with a stable wrist. The liquid changed its color depending on the variation in the lighting. As it was a supplementary ingredient, he didn't pursue precision and didn't use chemical experiment apparatus to separate and titrate the liquid. The 1,000-faced hunter's blood was like thin honey that slowly filled the bottom of the pot. When Klein felt that it was about time, he stopped tilting it and allowed the liquid to flow back. There's still about 20 milliliters left. My spiritual intuition is quite accurate. Klein withdrew his gaze from the glass bottle and tightened the lid. This 20 milliliters of 1,000-faced hunter's blood could still be used to make mystical items, Beyonder weapons, extraordinary scrolls, or for drawing symbols or labels in some ritualistic magic. It was still very precious. After putting the glass bottle back into the cotton-filled box, Klein went down the list and added the black jimsonweed juice and the dragon tooth grass powder. He saw that the liquid in the iron pot started to bubble. Without pausing, he picked up 3 strands of dark blue hair that resembled tiny snakes with his black-gloved right hand, and he firmly placed them on the surface of the liquid. Sizzle! A faint mist rose from the iron pot, and the color of the liquid turned a deep blue. It already has such a strange effect even without adding the main ingredients. As expected of a sequence 6 potion. Klein reached out and grabbed the silver tin box which vampire Emlyn White had thrown in as well. With a snapping sound, Klein opened the lid of the box, revealing a peach-like item inside. He didn't directly touch the 1,000-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland. Instead, he placed the tin box over the top of the pot and overturned it. A yellow-brown object with the grooves and ridges of a brain fell in, crashing into the dark blue liquid. At this moment, no liquid droplets splashed up, and the pituitary gland that was constantly changing its shape silently melted. The colors of gray and yellowish-brown quickly merged with the dark blue, and the bubbling suddenly increased in size. At this point, Klein was a little nervous, but he controlled himself. He picked up the last box and overturned the huge diamond-like human skin shadow characteristic into the pot. All of a sudden, the mist converged, and even the glow of the gas lamps showed signs of being attracted and devoured as the room turned darker. When everything returned to normal, Klein finally saw what the final potion looked like. It was blackish-green all over, and from time to time, it would produce a bubble the size of an eye, and as if it had a life of its own, it would produce a burping sound every few seconds. When the bubble reached the surface, it would immediately burst, and during this process, it would reflect light in a myriad of colors. The colors combined to form a picture of different faces, and the facial features seemed to be a random combination. Klein picked up the iron pot with one hand and poured the liquid inside into a glass bottle that he had prepared beforehand. Because of a potion's characteristics, not one bit was left in the pot. Using divination to confirm that the degree of harm was acceptable, which meant that the potion had been successfully concocted, Klein took the Faceless potion bottle and walked steadily back to the second floor, entering the room with the curtains closed. After locking the door, he sat on the edge of the bed and, with the help of cogitation, calmed his slightly agitated and anxious mood. After sitting upright for more than 10 seconds, Klein twisted the cap off of the bottle, raised his right hand, and swiftly poured the entire potion into his mouth. A slightly tingling sensation swished in his mouth and esophagus, and finally, it fermented into a numbing sensation that made him lose his senses. Klein's psyche seemed to be extracted from his body as he had the feeling of being a bystander and saw his mouth, nose, ears, and eyes melting. His entire face was melting. In just 2 or 3 seconds, his face and head had turned into what seemed like scorched white wax. His body was similarly abnormal. It was as if his bones and skin were being melted by blood. No, I can't allow such a situation to continue developing. Klein knew that if he didn't keep it under control, he could be on the verge of losing control at any moment. As a spectator, he tried his best to pull his thoughts back to his body, trying to visualize the layers of stacked spherical lights and maintain his state of cogitation. After a brief but repeated attempt, he finally felt his body once again. He tried his best to control every tiny part of his body to hold on to his lower limit. As the melting and dissolving assaulted him again and again, Klein lost sense of how long he held on for, but when it finally came to an end, he regained the feeling that his body belonged to him. At that moment, he knew that he had finally broken through the threshold and was now a Sequence 6. He was now a Faceless. Klein didn't sweat, but he was mentally exhausted. He barely got to his feet and walked to the full-length mirror, trying to observe what he looked like. Under the gas lamp's illumination, he took 2 sudden steps back and caused the floor to reverberate. The scene in the mirror was extremely shocking. Klein saw that his face and exposed skin were covered with dense, pale granules. It would make any normal creature who saw those go numb and subconsciously resist. The more timid ones might even lose their mind. Despite knowing the acting method, and having completely digested the magician potion, my advancement to Sequence 6 was still rather difficult. I was only 2 to 3 steps away from losing control. I wonder how much of a risk those Beyonders who relied on the accumulation of time and barely qualified to consume the potion faced. The probability of failure definitely isn't low. It's no wonder Sequence 7 is relatively common among the members of the churches, and they will shoulder the responsibility of captain or bishop, while the number of people at Sequence 6 begins to plummet. Klein closed his eyes and sat back in his chair. With the help of cogitation, he was able to restrain his overflowing spirituality and recover from his exhaustion. After about 10 minutes, the disgusting granules on his body had completely faded and merged into his flesh. Phew. Klein exhaled, walked back to the full-length mirror, and he looked at his full-bearded appearance. Suddenly, his facial hair began to squirm. His flesh and skin began to undergo a bizarre change like half-melted wax. Within a second or two, Klein had reverted to his original appearance: black hair, brown eyes, ordinary facial features, a clean face with a deep outline, and a somewhat thin body. He quietly gazed at his past self and stretched out his right hand to press it against his face. With a gentle touch, Klein's face changed again. His nose bridge was high, his lips were extremely thin, and there was a tinge of elegance in his handsome face. There was an unconcealable pride in his appearance. It was none other than vampire Emlyn White. A little too short. He laughed at himself. At this moment, the bones and ligaments in his body began to produce cracking and snapping sounds as his entire body suddenly soared up a little. He now looked identical to Emlyn White, externally. I've noticed that I can accurately recall the exterior appearance and temperament of every person I know, and I can grasp their unique scent. Klein's pores squirmed, and his body changed accordingly. The smell of his body became different as a result of this. He looked into the full-length mirror again, letting his hairline slowly recede, and he changed the color of his eyes into a deep gray. Without a sound, Dunn Smith seemed to come alive again, and he was staring at the team member who always came to him to report on unusual matters. Letting out a breath, Klein returned to his original form, but the corners of his mouth remained curled upwards. He thought for a moment, took a few steps back, and looked at the magazine, Ladies' Aesthetics, which he had bought to look at fashionable beauties, and he noted down the appearance of the actress on the cover. Then, he went back to the full-length mirror and wiped his face with his right hand. When he looked in the mirror again, he saw a young lady with black hair that went past her shoulders and delicate facial features. It really works. Klein looked down at his chest, but he didn't see any protrusions. Trying hard to control his body, he managed to create a pair of cups by moving his fat and some of his flesh. However, there was nothing he could do about his lower body. That is to say, it is just a superficial change in appearance, nothing fundamental. Also, I can only grow taller or shorter by 10 centimeters at the moment. Going beyond this range would be difficult. Also, there's a limit to the enlargement and shrinkage of the head. For example, I can't mimic Father Yutravsky's half-giant head at all. Also, I can only observe the appearance and temperament of the target in an instant, without knowing anything related to him. It's easy for me to be exposed when facing a spectator like Miss Justice. In the clown stage, the clown restrains the spectator, but in the faceless stage, it is actually somewhat restrained by the spectator. Interesting. Upon having this thought, Klein stopped changing and returned to the appearance of Sherlock Moriarty. Divination, fighting, as well as a magician's beyonder powers, have all been enhanced. As for how much they've improved, it can only be confirmed through practice. I should find some time to head to the Quelag Club tomorrow. Klein took one last look and went downstairs to clear up the mess. After rounding up everything, he quickly washed up and crawled into bed. Lying there, looking out the window at the crimson moonlight, he gradually calmed down. After a few minutes of this, Klein slowly closed his eyes and smiled to himself. Good night, Faceless. Chapter 452, Benson's Decision. Townsend Street, in between Empress Borough and Westborough. Zio Dericha was standing in a dark, secluded alley. Even without looking up, she could see the countless magnificent palaces and tall Gothic towers in the distance. It was the highest district in the whole of Backlund, and it was also where the lone royal family resided. It shared the same or even slightly higher status as the White Maple Palace of Intis and the Ormer Palace of the Fasak Empire in the southern and northern continent and in the entire world, but its name was neither romantic nor ancient. It was called the Sodila Palace, and in ancient Fasak, it meant balance. Zio looked away from the famous Bell of Order and directed her sight to the other side of the alley. In the shadows where the street lamps didn't shine, a figure slowly walked out. The figure wore a golden mask that revealed the lower half of his face. He was none other than the mysterious person who had previously sold the sheriff formula to Zio and had occasionally entrusted her with some tasks. When Zio and Furs discussed in private, they both suspected that the person was from MI9. Any progress this week? The man wearing the gold mask asked as per usual. Zio shook her head. No, I don't think anyone was keeping tabs on Capim before the incident. She paused for a moment, then she reluctantly asked, do you still want to continue investigating this matter? The masked man was silent for a moment. There's no need, but if you hear anything related in the future, then contact me right away. Today, I'll give you a new mission. What mission? Zio was completely in her bounty hunter state, ready to assess the risks. The masked guy laughed. This is a very simple mission, and it's one that you've been dreaming of doing. Seek to purchase the sheriff and interrogator main ingredients in all your circles, especially a special ingredient that can be directly concocted into a potion. If someone responds to it, we will pay for it. The purchased ingredients will belong to me? Zio blurted out a response. This was her greatest concern. No, do you believe that such a simple mission would have such a high reward? Of course, if you're able to fish out the person we're looking for, it's not impossible to negotiate and let you obtain the main ingredients, the masked man said with a chuckle. But I don't know the main ingredients of the interrogator potion, Biyao hesitantly said. I'll tell you later. This is also our advance payment. Even if we don't find the target, you'll have the main portion of a sequence 7 potion formula, worth more than 600 pounds. I think you're fully aware of our generosity, the masked man said in a bewitching tone. Generous indeed. Who's their target, and why are they willing to pay such a high price to find them? Well, if he were from MI9, taking advantage of this mission to retrieve the beyonder ingredients of the Arbiter pathway on the market should also be one of his goals. There's no problem about wasting money. As quite an experienced bounty hunter, Biyao instinctively thought of a few things. After some deliberation, she nodded and said, I'll take this commission. Very good. The masked man's tone turned relaxed as he surveyed his surroundings and said, the interrogator potion's main ingredients are the horn of a flash-patterned black snake and dust of a lake spirit. After saying that, he slowly retreated and melded into the shadows, disappearing into the corner of the alley. He really told me the main ingredients of the interrogator potion. Biyao was momentarily stunned. Only at that point did she clearly realize how much importance the masked man's faction placed on this mission. I wonder who their target is. It seems to be focused on some special ingredient that can be used to directly concoct a sheriff or interrogator potion. With this in mind, Biyao suddenly froze up. She remembered one thing. When she advanced to sheriff, she had used a special ingredient she had bought through furs, one that could be used to concoct the corresponding potion. Is that their target? Biyao instinctively decided to keep silent on this matter, to never tell the masked man anything. She rubbed her fat baby cheeks and walked towards the street outside, ready to take a public carriage back to Cherwood Borough. At that moment, she saw a brown carriage drive past. Her eyes were instantly attracted by the coat of arms on the carriage. The coat of arms consisted of a single flower and 2 rings. There was nothing special about it, but Biyao stared at it in a daze as though her gaze had frozen. It was only when the carriage was far away, did she withdraw her gaze. Her mood immediately reached rock bottom. It didn't turn for the better, even when she returned to the shared rented house. Seeing that her friend was in a bad mood, Furs poured 2 glasses of red wine and brought them to her. What happened? She sat across her and pushed one of the glasses toward Biyao. Biyao looked down at the red wine. After a full 2 minutes of silence, she said in a slightly hoarse voice, on the way back, I met someone I used to know. Who? Furs asked, cooperatively. Viscount Stratford, Biyao replied to any question she received without elaborating. Furs thought for a moment and then she said, this Viscount seems to be the captain of the Royal Guards. As a best-selling novel author, she would receive invitations from noblemen who liked literature and participated in afternoon tea parties and banquets from time to time. With her professional habits of collecting material as a writer, she would certainly volunteer to understand more famous noblemen. It was at such a party that she got to know Viscount Glaint. Yes, he used to be my father's deputy, Biyao said with some difficulty. Your father? Furs knew that Biyao came from a fallen aristocratic family and had some secrets. However, she didn't know the specifics. Biyao picked up the glass of red wine and gulped it down, coughing a few times after she choked. After calming herself down, she said, my family was once part of the aristocracy. In its heyday, it even served as an Earl Palatine. Earl Palatine? What position is that? Furs asked, half curious, half trying to soothe her friend's mood. It's equivalent to being the spokesperson for the royal family, nobles that are the closest to the throne, Biyao said in recollection, her face jubilant. From that moment forth, our family had the fief a true earl would have, but it wasn't as illustrious during the time of my father. However, we still held the trust of the former king, Might Wielder William VI. He was the leader of the Household Guards Division and the captain of the Royal Guards. Her tone gradually turned melancholic as she found it difficult to hide her pain. But 7 years ago, he was accused of participating in a revolt, and he was eventually executed and deprived of his aristocratic title and fiefdom. Because of this, my family fell from grace, and many of my family members even died for no reason. In order to live, we changed our surnames and left East Tucker County. I don't believe that my father would engage in mutiny. He was so loyal to the royal family, even more so than his belief in the goddess. In order to. Anyway, I left my mother and my younger brother and came to Backlund, looking for a chance to improve myself, hoping to restore my family's glory and my father's reputation. Zio was vague about some of the things midway through her recount, but Furs didn't mind. She sighed and said, "It'll be very, very difficult." But she immediately smiled. "But I will support you. And behind me is the mysterious Tarot Club," she added in her mind. Nighttime in Tingen City, 2 Daffodil Street. Melissa, who was doing math problems, turned her head to the door and looked at Benson, who had just taken off his half-top hat. "Where did you go? Aren't the results announced tomorrow?" "They're already available tonight, and I happen to know 2 of the city's employees who are in charge of the unified exam," Benson said with a smirk. In early December, he had enrolled for the civil servant unified examination, selected a relatively uncompetitive position, and, in the process, established friendships with several civil servants and a number of examination candidates through his eloquence and communication skills. What was the result? Melissa unconsciously put down the fountain pen in her hand. Benson's expression immediately darkened, but before Melissa could open her mouth, he revealed a bright smile. "I passed. And I'm ranked quite high." "That's great." Melissa stood up and took 2 steps forward. "You have to start preparing for the second round of exams at the end of January. It's held in Backlund. I need to prepare your luggage for you ahead of time. When are you planning on leaving?" Seeing his sister's concern, Benson walked into the living room, smiled and said, "I plan to do so after the new year. We'll go to Backlund together and rent a house there. Regardless of the success of the exam, I'm prepared to stay in Backlund and try my luck. And you can take advantage of the New Year's holiday to transfer to the technical school in Backlund to prepare for the entrance exam at the Backlund University of Technology and Industry in June." Just a month ago, the Backlund University of Technology and Industry had been reorganized and officially upgraded to a University for Industry and Technology. Melissa's lips unconsciously pursed as she quietly listened. She looked around wistfully and replied softly, "Okay." Friday afternoon at the Quelag Club. Klein walked out and hired a carriage to head for Prince Edisac's Red Rose Manor. It was the place where Talum had gone to a few days before his death. As a qualified detective, he would be completely unworthy of the £100 he was paid, if he didn't hold any investigations there. "No matter what, I still have to put on a convincing act," Klein muttered as he sat in the carriage and enjoyed the scenery outside the window. After his morning practice, he had roughly grasped the range of improvements in every aspect. Flame controlling, flaming jump, and other Beyonder powers had become about 30% stronger. The might of air bullets and the length of the underwater breathing pipe had even increased several-fold. His divination and combat skills had also received a substantial improvement. Paper figurine substitutes and damage transfer didn't experience much change, but because of the growth of his spirituality, the number of times that they could be used had increased. Klein finally arrived at Red Rose Manor amidst the rumbling journey and informed the 2 soldiers guarding the entrance of his purpose. After passing the news, he met the old butler from before. "You can ask everyone here." The white-haired elderly butler paused, then added, "Except that lady." "That's what I want. I don't want to get into trouble." Klein laughed casually. "All right." Chapter 453, Stairs, Red Rose Manor, outside the luxurious rooms filled with all kinds of antiques. Klein stood at the door and asked the 6th maid he had met today. The young maid was wearing a black and white servant dress that had the characteristics of the times. She was pretty, in her prime, and had natural curls to her brown hair. She had a hint of playfulness on her face. "Who does Mr. Talum meet when he visits?" Klein repeated the question numbly. The maid replied almost without a pause, "Mr. Talum usually requests to meet His Highness, or to accompany him in riding horses, or to discuss matters. If His Highness happens to be absent, he will meet with that lady. They are very good friends. He receives permission from the butler. Talim is good friends with the commoner lady who Prince Edisac likes. Meeting in private from time to time? It was likely that he was persuading her to leave this place, so as to not affect the reputation of the prince. Klein nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Talim and the young lady, what would they talk about? When he asked this question, Klein suddenly recalled how Talim had fallen in love just recently. With his rich experience from the information age, he somehow came up with an extremely contrived romance story. The maid wasn't afraid of the detective. She smiled, shook her head, and said, "At times like these, we're all asked to leave the room." This. Even more than ever, Klein couldn't resist making associations, even to the point of changing the colors of Prince Edisac's hat and helmet. Without waiting for him to ask any further questions, the maid chuckled and said, "Detective Moriarty, if you want to find out exactly what the lady and Mr. Talim were talking about, you can ask her directly. The old butler doesn't permit that." Klein confidently pushed out his scapegoat. He changed the topic and said with a smile, "You seem to know more than the other servants. You even know to call me Detective Moriarty." The maid looked around, maintained her smile, and said, "It's because I've been serving the lady during my rotations. She's always wanted to meet you, Detective Moriarty. After all, she's close friends with Mr. Talim and cares a great deal about his death. Unfortunately, she always ends up missing you." "Always?" Klein was sensitive to the words, "always," "just happened," and "missed." The maid nodded seriously and said, "The first time His Highness invited you to be his guest, she intentionally threw a tantrum and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to walk downstairs to meet you. Who knew that you would leave in a hurry? Afterwards, she took the initiative to represent His Highness to place flowers on Mr. Talim's grave, but as she didn't know what you looked like, she wasn't able to find you. And today, she just happened to go to the golf course out back to relax on horseback. Otherwise, even if the butler didn't allow it, she would have tried to find a way to meet you. What a coincidence." Klein sighed as he suddenly grasped a crucial point. On the day of Talim's funeral, it was the commoner lady he loved who had offered flowers in the prince's place. On that day, Klein was most concerned about the lady with the black veil and the sapphire ring on her finger. She might have a grade 0 sealed artifact or some powerful existence of an equal level. All of a sudden, a thought flashed through Klein's mind. The woman with the sapphire ring on her finger was wearing a long, heavy black dress. Accompanied by 2 maids, she slowly disappeared into the distance. One of the ladies had brown natural curls. The image of the maid quickly overlapped with the one in front of Klein, and it was abnormally identical. Klein's body tensed up, and sweat rolled down his back, but his expression didn't change at all. Using the abilities of a clown, he pretended like he was recalling the event, and he asked with a smile, "Were you with that lady on the day of Talim's funeral?" The maid replied without much thought, "Yes." "Damn, it's really her." Klein maintained his smile. "Very well, next question." As if nothing had happened, he began to inquire about other things, then he switched to another servant and continued. However, Klein secretly shortened the process and sped up the progress. He wanted to leave Red Rose Manor before the young lady returned from her riding. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, before the sky had turned dark, Klein left the manor much earlier than expected and took the carriage sent by the old butler back to the city. Sitting in the window with his back against the wall wrapped in silk and muslin, he was relieved to have the energy to reflect on the whole situation. It was Prince Edisac's beloved commoner lady who had cursed Talim. Why did she have to deal with a descendant of a fallen noble family? To take revenge against Talim for trying to break up the relationship between her and the prince? But there's no need for her to do it herself. She can find a chance to mention it while in bed. Prince Edisac has plenty of ways to make Talim disappear without a sound. Talim was in a state of deep love before he died. Yes. The first sign was after he successfully persuaded the commoner lady to leave Prince Edisac. They had an affair? So, the commoner lady who was brought back to the manor killed Talim in order to silence him and remove any latent dangers? Logically speaking, it makes sense, but the problem is how could a person with a grade 0 sealed artifact or a powerhouse of an equivalent level be restricted by Prince Edisac? Even if the Augustus family is an angel family, with the accumulation of enough knowledge, they would still need to use tremendous strength and special methods to be able to restrain someone like that. This isn't something a prince can do. Besides, how could such a figure have taken a fancy to Talim? Why does she want to see me all the time? Did she sense that I'm using the gray fog to spy on her? No, if that were the case, I would have been buried with Talim on the day of his funeral. Besides, when she first wanted to see me, I didn't have any blood, hair, or belongings. I hadn't made any divinations yet. Klein was puzzled as he thought about it. In the end, he decided to bury the problem deep within his heart. He wasn't to probe or investigate. I hope that the machinery hive mind, with my earlier reminder, will pay importance to this matter of noticing the royal family's abnormality. Yes, they might regard it with great importance, not because of Prince Edisac's reputation, but for another reason. I hope the royal family continues to prevent the lady from visiting me. After a few days, when the time is right, I'll relinquish this mission, express how powerless I am on this matter, and then use the excuse of going to the south for a holiday, to change my identity and hide for a while. Klein's heart gradually calmed down. Evenings in Backlund were always replaced by dark clouds and drizzling rain, and Klein, who felt physically and mentally exhausted, held down his half-top hat and walked quickly across the wet street to number 15 Minsk Street under the illumination of the street lamps. After resting for a bit and taking advantage of the dark surroundings, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. After advancing to sequence 6 Faceless, he had always wanted to check the mysterious space to see if there were any changes. However, as he was too tired last night and couldn't wake up in the middle of the night, he had to wait until he was done being busy outside. In addition, Klein had to eliminate any interference in order to divine a particular matter. That was, after this advancement, when his spirituality wasn't stable yet, he didn't hear the illusory ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria, anymore. He wanted to know if this was a natural change after ascending to sequence 6, or if there was some other reason. Within the majestic palace, the mottled bronze tables and the 22 high-back chairs with different symbols on their backs stood quietly, as if they had remained unchanged since time immemorial. The same was true for the gray fog below them, as well as the endless emptiness around them. But as soon as Klein entered, his spiritual intuition was keenly aware that the mysterious space was somewhat different from before. He was in no hurry to explore or make any attempts. Calming himself down, he sat at the end of the table, conjured a pen and paper, and wrote a divination statement, the reason why I haven't heard any ravings after my advancement. Holding the piece of paper and muttering the sentence, Klein leaned back in his chair and quickly entered the dreamland with the help of cogitation. In the dusky sky and land, images flashed, and in the end, they all came to a stop on a particular scene. It was Klein, whose face and body was still covered in pale granules. He was surrounded by an illusory, thin layer of gray fog that was undetectable. The dream shattered. Klein opened his eyes and roughly understood the reason. The gray fog has interwoven with reality, helping me block out the ravings that come from who knows where. After advancing to sequence 6, my connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog has become even stronger, thus, bringing about certain changes and allowing me to naturally borrow a portion of its powers. From the looks of it, that should be the case. Yes, I should try to explore the area and see if there are any changes. Klein slowly stood up and followed his spiritual perception, walking in a certain direction outside the ancient palace. Beneath his feet was the gray fog that spread out like the sea. He finally decided to stop after walking for an unknown period of time. However, when he gave up on exploring, a light suddenly flickered at the end of the path. In his joy, Klein quickened his pace and approached. 7 or 8 seconds later, he saw a flight of stairs that seemed to lead to heaven. The staircase was formed from pure light. It was holy, transparent, and untainted, capable of shocking anyone's heart. There were only 4 levels as the staircase reached up into the void, and each level was rather high, as though it was meant for creatures even larger than giants. Klein looked up, followed its path, and saw a layer of grayish-white fog, condensed and suspended in midair, as though it was supporting something. It was a significant distance from the staircase of light. The 4-step staircase represents my consumption of the Sequence 9, Sequence 8, Sequence 7, and Sequence 6 potions. What exactly is above that layer of fog? Klein cautiously advanced until he reached the staircase of light and stepped onto it. There was nothing odd about the steps, and they were as solid as stone. Klein went up the stairs, climbed up to the 4th level, and then tried to look up at the area above the gray fog. Unfortunately, his vision couldn't penetrate anything. He thought for a moment, then he took 2 steps forward and jumped up with all his might. However, the moment he left the staircase of light, he lost his momentum and his spirit body's flight instinct. He plummeted straight down and landed on the bottom layer of the gray fog. Looks like I need to advance another 2 to 3 other sequences. If Sequence 4 really does result in a qualitative change, then I should be able to see after becoming a demigod. Klein looked up and made a judgment. Chapter 454, Who Am I? After looking around, Klein, who had found nothing else, returned to the stone pillar-propped ancient palace. He sat at the head of the long bronze table with his eyes half closed. He examined his spirituality growth with the number of members he could draw in. Including the empty positions that I could handle from before, I can still recruit 4 new members. However, there are no suitable targets at the moment. Klein shook his head and muttered before returning to the real world to busy himself for a good dinner. After slicing potatoes, boiling beef, adding onions, and stir-frying them for a while, as well as sprinkling seasonings like sugar and pepper, Klein poured the prepared hot water into the saucepan, covered it with a lid, and turned the fire down. I have to admit that a magician's flame controlling is a good helper in the kitchen. Ever since I got it, my culinary skills have clearly improved. If it wasn't for the loss of control, the monsters, the searches, and the evil gods, the world would be at peace and perfect if everyone was dedicated to using their abilities without causing public damage. Klein sighed and left the kitchen to enter the living room. As the light from the wall lamps spilled out, Klein, who had been planning on flipping through magazines and wait for the appropriate time to throw in the potatoes, carrots, and the proper amount of salt, he couldn't help thinking about how to act as a Faceless. Just after waking up this morning, my spirituality had completely stabilized. I discovered that although there aren't any signs of digesting the Faceless potion in me, I do have a certain level of harmony. This is a phenomenon that never happened after consuming the seer, clown, and magician potions. With this in mind, Klein looked up at the oriel window. As it was already dark outside, it had become like a mirror, faithfully reflecting Sherlock Moriarty with his black hair, brown eyes, beard, and gold-rimmed glasses. Klein nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it's because I've always been acting as Klein Moretti. Yes. In a way, Sherlock Moriarty is just Klein's disguise, not someone else. Although I've received many memory fragments and gained some of the original's feelings that previously existed, in essence, I'm still a guest from an alternate world. I am Earth's keyboard warrior, Zhou Mingrue. I've been through so much in the last 5 months that sometimes I even think I'm Klein Moretti. Amidst the silence, many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, giving him a lot of insight. However, I'm still Zhou Mingrue, who's donning the skin of Klein Moretti. Someone who has never given up the idea of returning. He slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the figure reflected on the oriel window had already changed. It was a young man with dark brown eyes and short black hair. His facial features were unremarkable, and he appeared refined, but he had obvious eye bags with an inkling of a double chin. This was Zhou Mingrue from Earth. Long time no see. Klein sighed, raised his hands and rubbed his face. By the time he lowered his arms, he was back as Sherlock Moriarty. After this period of contemplation and adjustment, he inexplicably felt that the gap between his spirituality and the potion had reduced significantly, and there were signs of them slowly blending together. No wonder Nimblewright Master Rosego's teacher, yes, perhaps his teacher would say that you can disguise yourself as anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. This is likely a core rule of a faceless acting method. Once one forgets this point, it would be easy to forget yourself amidst the constant changes, eventually turning into a monster. Klein felt enlightened when he recalled what he had previously obtained via spirit channeling. He crossed his right leg and leaned back, quickly coming up with a plan for the future. Search for and conclude the actual acting rules for a faceless. In the Beyonder circles of Backland, through the Tarot Club, gather information about mermaids, in preparation to complete the ritual at sea. Directly or indirectly get the Solar High Priest potion formula to help Little Sun advance to Sequence 7, so that he has the clearance to obtain the method for removing a rampager's mental corruption on a Beyonder characteristic. But I can't fully place my hopes on Little Sunday. I should still attempt to look. Klein, whose mood was slowly turning staid, snapped his fingers, reducing the stove's fire in the kitchen as the fragrance of beef emanated. At that moment, he heard the doorbell ring. The visitor was none other than Lawyer Jürgen. Even though it was drizzling and the ground was wet, Jürgen was still dressed meticulously. He even wore a vertical collar. "What's the matter?" Klein, who was very familiar with Jürgen, didn't make any small talk and directly asked. Jürgen put away his black umbrella, patted a few drops of water off of his double-breasted frock coat and said, "Sherlock, I'm leaving Backland on Monday next week to go south on a holiday with my grandmother. The warm environment and the clean air suits her very well." "That's excellent news." Klein took the initiative to deduce, smiling as he asked, "You want me to temporarily adopt Brody?" Jürgen shook his head gravely. "My grandma can't bear to part with Brody and insisted on taking him with her. I've already asked, as long as we put him in a cage and buy a full-price ticket, he can board the steam locomotive, but we have to keep the cage clean at all times to not pollute the air above. Honestly, the smell in the third-class carriage is enough to overwhelm the stench of cat poop." Klein chuckled. "Brody shouldn't be too happy to leave, right?" "But he's even more reluctant to part with my grandmother," Jürgen replied. He pressed his hat and changed the subject. "I'm here to inform you that if you need to be released on bail or settle any legal disputes during this period of time, you can go to my colleague. Here is his business card. I've already informed him that he wouldn't be leaving Backland this year." What a professional, to think that he even considered this problem. "However, I don't need to do that for now. I'm now an informant for the machinery hive mind, and I won't be remanded at the police station under normal circumstances." Klein thanked him with a smile, took the name card, and slipped it into his pocket. Jürgen didn't have any intention of chatting or entering the room. He immediately raised his hand and said, "I still have to visit the rest of my clients." "Sherlock, I'll see you tomorrow." "No, I'll see you next year." "Then, I must wish your family a happy new year in advance." Klein smiled and waved. After watching Jürgen leave with his umbrella, Klein closed the door and sat back down in the living room. At this moment, apart from the flame which was licking the bottom of the pot in the kitchen, there were no other sounds coming from the house. It was so quiet that Klein could hear the carriages outside moving in the distance. He looked around slowly and saw the coffee table, contracts, cupboards, pens, porcelain cups, dining table, chairs, and walls. Retracting his gaze, Klein leaned back against the sofa and looked out the window at the dark night and the street lamps emitting a misty glow in the dark. In the deep cold silence, he sighed. The new year. The lightning gradually calmed down, and the darkness became the ruler of the earth. The exploratory team from the City of Silver finally reached their destination after a short but, at the same time, not short trek and numerous battles. On both sides of the street, most of the houses had collapsed. Only a few could barely hold on, but their surfaces were mottled with the dust of time. With the help of an animal hide lantern whose light didn't reach far, Derek Berg saw the completely collapsed walls and streets that were in such ruin that even weeds didn't grow. On both sides of the streets were half-collapsed houses, with a tiny minority barely standing. However, their surfaces were mottled and filled with signs of aging. The white and blue colors that formed the foundation of the coatings, the pointed structures which were different from the City of Silver, had already turned gray, making it hard for anyone to imagine their original appearance. However, Derek could figure out the city's past through such observations. It had definitely experienced a long history with a considerable number of inhabitants, developing its own civilization in the Dark Ages. The humans here took potions, built and repaired buildings, and defended the city wall. About 6 teams or more had explored the outside and hunted monsters in search of the necessary resources to survive. They would celebrate for any brief periods of calm, offering sacrifices to the gods and yearning for a response. They gave birth to the next generation, allowing hope to continue. However, in the end, they disappeared into the darkness, losing all their voices and leaving behind only ruins. The ruins were like a huge grave, burying a civilization that had struggled to survive but eventually vanishing dismally. Demon Hunter Colin looked around, his expression somewhat solemn, as though he saw the future of the City of Silver. He pointed ahead and said, "The other places have already been cleared. The temple is in the center of the city." The exploratory team dispersed a bit, but they still maintained sufficient order and didn't let down their guard. After passing through ruins that had been destroyed for an unknown period of time and went past streets so quiet that they drove people mad, Derek finally saw a high, wide artificially made platform. On top of the high platform, there was a half-collapsed building. It looked extremely similar to the temples in the City of Silver. It had a dome propped up by pillars, creating an arched entrance. The style of the buildings here was completely different from that of the other buildings. It really is true that they later converted to the fallen creator. The thought had barely crossed Derek's mind when the 4 lanterns in the team went out at the same time. All of a sudden, the exploratory team was plunged into pure darkness. There was no lightning in the sky, the candles on the ground had extinguished, and all human breathing seemed to disappear at once. Derek's body immediately tensed, as he felt as if some monster had stuck its tongue out in the darkness and was trying to lick his scalp, but his spiritual perception told him that nothing real had appeared. At that moment, an immature, helpless, terrified, and dry voice sounded out by his ear. It was a child whispering, "Save me. Save me." For a moment Derek froze, not knowing how to react, but in an instant, a coruscating glimmer of dust appeared before him. The dust exploded one after another, igniting a silvery white light that illuminated the surrounding area. Colin stared at Derek and said in a deep voice, "What's on your mind?" Derek instantly snapped to his senses and clasped his hands in shame and pressed them to his mouth and nose as if in prayer. His body immediately emitted rays of clean, pure light, causing the surrounding darkness to silently disperse. The other team members seized the moment to reignite the candles. Because of the demon hunter's timely reaction, no members disappeared this time, nor were there any new members appearing. Colin retracted his gaze from Derek and looked at the half-collapsed temple on the high platform. He solemnly said, "From now on, we can't afford to be careless. We have to be on full alert." Chapter 455, Help Seeker. Within the half-collapsed temple, only a few stone pillars remained intact as they collectively supported half of the main hall. At the very front of the main hall, there was an altar covered in cracks. In the middle of the altar, there was a huge, pitch-black cross. Hanging from the cross was a naked man who was hanging upside down. Around his ankles, thighs, and torso there were obvious rusty metal spikes protruding outward that were accompanied by bright red bloodstains. Derek knew that this was the statue of the fallen creator, but he couldn't help look down to size up the statue's face. He saw the face of the statue, the nose, mouth, and ears were all blurry, except for the eyes which were carved with abnormal clarity. The fallen creator's eyes were tightly shut, as though he was suffering from guilt and pain. "Look away, don't study the statue of an evil god," Demon Hunter Colin warned in a low voice. "Yes, Your Excellency." The few members of the exploratory team immediately retracted their gazes. Before today, although the City of Silver had discovered many destroyed cities and written records pointing to evil gods during their explorations, most of the residents had never seen the statues of so-called evil gods. The remaining area of the temple wasn't very wide, so the exploratory team quickly split up into groups of 2 or 3 and completed the investigations without finding anything abnormal. Upon seeing this, Colin, the chief of the 6-member council, said after a few seconds of deliberation, "Let's head underground." As he spoke, he drew one of the 2 swords he carried on his back and smeared it with a grayish-silver ointment. Then, he removed a small metal bottle from a hidden compartment on his belt, pulled out the stopper, and gulped the contents of the potion. At this moment, Derek felt as if the light blue eyes of the chief had become a little brighter. The members of the exploratory team made their utmost careful preparations. Under the illumination of the 4 animal hide lanterns, they followed the stairs on the left side of the statue as they walked down into the underground area. Derek took his turn holding the lantern, walking at the front left as he cautiously entered the darkness. He heard the sound of his own footsteps and those of his companions echoing off of the stone steps. They produced a distant and empty echo. The echoes didn't suffer from any interference, making the absolute silence beneath them obvious. However, in the hearts of the exploratory team members, it was like a knock on the door. The attempt to uncover a secret that had been buried for an unknown number of years left them feeling extremely tense. After walking without having any sense of time, Derek finally saw that the road ahead had turned flat. He also saw the newly discovered mural which the corrupted Dark Regents had mentioned. The mural was spread across 2 sides of the wall. It was simply colored and gloomy, looking ancient as if it had seen the vicissitudes of life. Derek took a casual glance and was immediately attracted by one of the murals. On the wall to the left up ahead, a pure white cross was depicted in the middle. It was surrounded by seawater-like blackness, drowning all the humans who were struggling as they stretched out their arms. Hanging upside down from the cross was the fallen creator. The rusted nails and blood-red stains were no different from the statues in the outside world. But in this mural, the fallen creator was suffering from a black erosion, so much so that part of the white of the cross had become pitch black. In addition, the cross supported a hazy piece of land, and countless humans were kneeling and praying to the fallen creator. Around the mural, in the deepest part of the darkness, there were 6 figures akin to evil gods. In the upper left corner was a woman wearing a black, classical dress. Her clothes were layered but not complicated, and it was embedded with a starry sheen. Her body was relatively ethereal, with signs of rippling outward. Her face was blurry, as though she was wearing a mask without any facial features. The darkness around her surged as one strange eye after another faintly became discernible. Directly above was a young man wearing a pure white robe. His face was painted with a pure gold color, and there were tentacles in the form of light growing out of his skin. In his hands was a putrid green book and a radiant spear, and his chest and back were inverted. In the upper right corner was a trident-wielding monster with an octopus-like head, wide eyes, and a body wrapped in lightning. The feathers of countless birds formed his cloak, and the darkness turned into waves that supported the bottom of his feet. At the bottom right was a supple and beautiful woman. Her chest bulged, propping her clothes up. In her arms was a rotting baby, and at her feet were black ears of wheat, spring water squirming with flesh, herbs dripping with pus, and wildly mating animals. Directly below was an old man wearing a hood that revealed his mouth, wrinkles, and a white beard. The old man held an open book, and on top of it was an eye that was the symbol of omniscience. At first glance, this old man looked the most normal, but the smile on his face was indescribably evil. At the bottom left was a giant warrior in tattered armor. He held a long sword and was sitting on a throne with bleak dusk as its backdrop. What this mural means is that when the cataclysm struck, the evil gods climbed out of the abyss. In order to save the people of the world, the fallen creator had suffered the vast majority of the sins and pain, and as a result, showed signs of being corrupted and having his image change. But I think he is the worst evil god. Carrying an animal hide lantern in his hand, Derek looked at the mural on the wall as he walked. He realized that the description was identical to Dark Regence's description, with the core theme being that the place where they were had not been abandoned by the gods. Instead, it was blessed by the Creator and had maintained civilization through the apocalypse. Of course, Dark Regents had only briefly mentioned it, and the details were far what the murals depicted. Throughout the entire process, Derek didn't let his guard down. He prepared himself in case any accidents were to happen so that he could respond immediately. Under the dim yellow light of the candle, the exploratory team went through many corridors, halls, and rooms one by one, delving deep into the temple's basement. Suddenly, a semi-open gray stone door appeared in front of them. Outside the door, a cluster of beautiful mushroom-shaped objects grew. They were palm-sized, with white stems and bright red heads, sparkling with dark golden specks. Upon seeing these mushrooms, the members of the exploratory team had their appetites whet. All they wanted to do was to rush over, pull out a stalk, and stuff it into their mouths. Gulp. Quite a few people swallowed their saliva. However, most of the people who were able to enter the exploratory team had rich experience and were of a relatively high sequence. Having received a warning beforehand, someone immediately stood up and said in a low voice, "Those are rotten flesh and hairy scalps." Derek knew this teammate and that his name was Joshua. He had successfully traded for a mystical item from a particular exploratory expedition. Joshua stretched out his left, scarlet-gloved hand at the door. With a flash of light, a burning fireball quickly took shape and shot out, landing directly on those extremely tempting mushrooms. Boom! The ground trembled slightly, and an inferno spread out to cover the space of 2 meters. By the time the fire subsided, all of the mushrooms had already disappeared, leaving only bits and pieces of flesh and blood. It left all of the Beyonders, who nearly failed to resist the temptation, disgusted. Demon Hunter Colin didn't interfere with the actions of the team. He quietly watched from the side, nodding from time to time. Why would there be mushrooms made from flesh and hair? Where did the flesh and hair come from? Joshua withdrew his left palm and muttered to himself in confusion. Another member of the team made a bold guess. The original inhabitants of this city? It's possible. Perhaps their deaths were a result of turning into pure flesh and hair. Derek agreed inwardly. After a brief discussion, the exploratory team split into several groups and cleaned up the hall outside the gray stone door. After doing all this, they regrouped and slowly passed through the door, ready to engage in combat at any moment. Behind the door was a place that looked like an altar. The surrounding light could hardly dispel the darkness of the region, which seemed to hide something unknown. Above the altar, a similar pitch-black cross and an upside-down fallen creator was erected there. Carrying an animal hide lantern, Derek stood the closest as he instinctively swept a glance. His gaze suddenly froze because he discovered that the fallen creator statue here was different from the one outside. Its eyes were open. He had blood-red eyes and black pupils, staring straight at any intruders like it possessed life. Tat. 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 Derek heard the chattering of teeth. He originally imagined that it came from a team member, but he soon realized that he was the one trembling. Although he didn't understand much about the evil god's dangers, his teeth were instinctively chattering at that instant. Tat. 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 His teammates reacted similarly. At that moment, a speck of powder floated into the air. Demon Hunter Colin clenched his fist. Boom! As the sound of thunder reverberated through the air, Derek and the others suddenly snapped to their senses, escaping their nightmare state from earlier. Before they could investigate the area, the sound of weeping could be heard from behind the altar. Sob, sob, sob. Sob, sob, sob. In the chilling silence, Demon Hunter Colin calmly ordered, "Derek, Joshua, go around and take a look." As a chill went through his body, Derek held the animal hide lantern and the axe of Hurricane in his hand. Together with Joshua, he slowly walked around to the back of the altar. As the darkness was gradually dispersed by the light, they saw a black figure curled up behind the altar. After taking 2 steps forward, the shadow revealed its original form. It was a 7 or 8-year-old child, with soft yellow hair. He closed his eyes, as though he wasn't used to the light, as he shouted in excitement, "Save me, save me." Derek's pupils shrank, and when he thought of the cry for help he had heard in the pure darkness earlier, he subconsciously lifted his axe of Hurricane. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin took a step forward and solemnly asked, "Who are you?" The child stopped pleading for help and said reminiscently, My name is Jack." After dinner, Klein put on his coat and hat in preparation to head out. He was going to find Miss Sharon, resolve the problem of the baronet digging up a tunnel, and ask for clues about mermaids. He wanted to complete these matters before Detective Sherlock Moriarty headed south for a vacation. Chapter 456, Playing Ghosts Outside the Bravehearts Bar. A rental carriage briskly drove by. Inside the carriage, Klein, who was wearing a half-top hat, was sitting opposite Sharon, who was still wearing her black Gothic regal dress. Looking at the expressionless and pale face of his former bodyguard, Klein was at a loss on how to exchange pleasantries. He could only go straight to the point. "I'm done with my preparations." Although Sequence 6 Faceless had only given him one Beyonder ability, all the powers he had before had experienced a clear upgrade, resulting in a great improvement to his strength. This was the best form of preparation. However, a Faceless powers could be deemed a godly skill in certain situations. For example, when being pursued or trying to infiltrate. Klein couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. Sharon listened quietly and simply said, "Tonight?" She spoke with a slight rise in intonation towards the end to indicate an inquiry. "If it's fine with you, then I'm fine as well," Klein responded, prepared. "All right." Sharon nodded. After a few seconds of silence, Klein asked in deliberation, "Have you heard about anything to do with mermaids? Do you know where one can meet such a creature of legends?" Sharon's blue eyes stared unblinkingly at Klein, as though she had transformed into a real doll. After a while, she emotionlessly said, "There are no longer mermaids in places where humans can reach. Only the fishermen of the Gargas Islands would occasionally hear the mermaids singing in the midst of a storm during their long voyages to hunt white-tailed whales." Located in the depths of the Sonia Sea, the Gargas Islands was the farthest human colony in the sea, characterized by local products such as whale oil and whale meat. "I wonder if this rumor is true or fake." Klein nodded. "I understand." The bell chimes in the night rang out quietly, as though they came from a faraway place. There was an abandoned chapel in the middle of William Street. Withered vines crawled over its walls and gray stones were strewn everywhere. Inside the chapel, feces and debris intertwined amidst the rocks and dead grass. In the half-collapsed corner, a middle-aged man, wearing black tights, was moving stones that hid the entrance to a cave. He carefully and excitedly went into the tunnel, carrying his digging tools, lighting tools, and earth basket. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes were puffy. He was Baronet Rafter Pound, who was considered mentally ill by the outside world, but he was secretly a descendant of the Tudor family of the Fourth Epoch. This prodigy, who was always entangled with high-class callgirls, had a serious expression on his face, and his eyes were bright. It was impossible to find any signs of him being addicted to drinking and sex. He pushed himself up on his elbows and rapidly crawled down the slope, as though the end of the tunnel hid the greatest and only hope of his life. Not long after, he touched the wet mud and cold stone in front of him. This didn't extinguish Rafter Pound's enthusiasm. He repeated motions that he was extremely proficient with after having recently gained the experience. As he was digging, carrying, and moving things, an empty area appeared before him. It was a dark underground palace that was in front of him. Rafter Pound's expression immediately became crazed with excitement. He quickly moved forward and grabbed the black iron badge. The badge was a hand holding a scepter. Seeing this, Rafter Pound's eyes lit up as if they were on fire. Just as he put the black iron badge on his chest, everything in front of him shattered. He was still in the narrow and irregular tunnel, with wet mud and ice-cold stones in front of him. No, there was someone else there who was quietly watching him. He had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no eyebrows, and no ears. Rafter Pound's pupils contracted. He could only feel a numbness rising along his spine from his waist down to the back of his head. Without even thinking about it, he immediately threw away all his tools and frantically retreated. His elbows smacked the ground, but he felt no pain despite having a mangled wound. Finally, Rafter Pound left the tunnel and returned to the abandoned chapel. Because of the loss of his lantern, he could only see the deep darkness and the dim crimson that shrouded the edges. Suddenly, the withered vines that were crawling up the wall swayed like snakes. A figure walked out from the darkness. She was wearing a Gothic regal dress and a black small soft hat, with a pale face to the point of being transparent, as well as pale blonde hair and blue eyes that didn't look human. Rafter Pound almost shouted out loud. For such a woman to appear in an environment such as this was no different from a ghost story from folklore. Tap. 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 He took a few steps back and almost tripped over a rock. At that moment, he seemed to think of something, and he suppressed his horror in an instant, revealing an excited and hopeful expression. Are you that evil spirit inside the underground palace? Yes, it must be you. Sir Pound, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Faceless Klein came out of the tunnel and stood in the shadows. His and Sharon's original plan had been to scare Rafter Pound off, scaring him so badly that he would no longer dare to explore the underground ruins again. However, Rafter Pound's reaction was somewhat out of their expectations. Sharon was silent for a second before tacitly asking, "What do you wish to say?" Rafter Pound quietly exhaled, and he then curled his lips into a smile. After attempting for so many years, I believe you already understand that killing the descendants of the Tudor family won't help you break the seal. Only by working with me, who has the great Tudor bloodline, can you hope to get out of this predicament that has lasted for more than 2,000 years. The Tudors knew about the existence of the evil spirit, but they still died in that room. Klein frowned as spoke before Sharon could. He imitated Sharon's ethereal voice. What took you until today to come here? This was a branch of the Faceless Beyonder powers, to mimic the sound of a target. He could reproduce any voice as long as he heard it before. Of course, Klein believed he couldn't repeat the ravings of the true creator and the pleas of Mr. Dorr. This Beyonder power was still limited to the realm of ordinary people. Sharon looked sideways at him but didn't expose him. Rafter Pound didn't notice and chuckled. It's because the Dark Emperor has appeared. Fate tells me that the glory of the Blood Emperor will appear once again. Is there some logical connection? Klein had an inexplicable feeling that Rafter Pound was more like a madman than before. He asked in Sharon's voice again, "Dark Emperor?" Haha. Rafter Pound laughed, "Yes, hero bandit Dark Emperor. He must be closely related to the real Dark Emperor." Why don't I know that? Klein felt amused. He thought for a moment, then he stopped asking, giving up the right to ask questions. Sharon, for some reason, remained silent. Upon seeing this, Rafter Pound was overjoyed as he quickly asked, "So, what's your answer?" "I refuse," Sharon replied emotionlessly. Rafter suppressed his anxiety and tried to persuade her again. At this moment, his eyes suddenly glazed over as he abruptly took a few steps to the side, arriving at a relatively intact stone wall. This. Klein and Sharon noticed an abnormality at the same time. They responded in their own ways, one pulling out a revolver and pointing it at Rafter Pound, the other filling the ruined chapel with a crimson lunar brilliance. Rafter Pound didn't even look at them. He faced the stone wall and slammed his head into it. Thump. 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 He slammed his head 3 times in a row and fainted with blood dripping from his forehead. Then he got up again, his eyes were bloodshot for some unknown reason. Rafter Pound raised his right hand and wiped the blood from his forehead, covering his palm with blood. He stuck out the tip of his tongue, licked the scarlet liquid, and said in an intoxicated manner, "A member of the Tudor bloodline sure is delicious, it's really intoxicating. It will allow my loathing to exceed its limits to the greatest extent, and it will help me temporarily expand the boundary of the seal." Klein's muzzle was aimed at him as he asked in a stunned tone, "The evil spirit in the ruins?" Blood trickled across Rafter Pound's face, and he laughed horribly. "You guessed right. Before, I judged that you were weak and wanted to corrupt your mind and enter your dreams to tempt you into rescuing me. Who knows, haha, you're also a person with a secret. Don't be so direct. Klein subconsciously glanced at Sharon, but he found nothing out of the ordinary about her. What do you want to do? Klein asked directly. The evil spirit sighed. I'm an innocent person who was harmed because of a Lista tutor's ambition. Due to the constraints of my corpse, I've been trapped in that underground ruin for nearly 2,000 years. I hope that you can help me out of this predicament and allow me to become a free spirit. I swear, I won't involve innocent people. After saying that, he looked at Sharon with his bloodshot eyes. You should be a wraith from the mutant pathway. The next stop is a critical point to becoming a demigod. I'm not sure if you have the puppet potion formula, but I can help you obtain it. I can even be a part of your ritual. That is the reward I can promise you. Puppet, sequence 4 of the mutant pathway is called Puppet? What a strange name. Klein muttered inwardly. The evil spirit turned to look at him. You will similarly be rewarded. It's an object that can be considered mystical and precious, and because of some sort of attraction, its holder came to the underground palace and died by the side of the Tudor descendants. This is what it looks like. As he spoke, the evil spirit spread open the palm of his hand, causing the crimson moonlight to form a scene. Inside the picture, there was a normal-looking tarot card. The image on it was completely different from the others. Sitting inside a chariot wasn't a king, but rather a male priest wearing a dark red robe. The priest looked like Roselle Gustave. This. A card of blasphemy. Klein's eyes instantly shifted. He saw that the starlight in the upper left corner had condensed into a line of text, Sequence 0, Red Priest. Chapter 457, Information provided by the evil spirit Sequence 0, Red Priest. Which pathway's Sequence 0 is this? I've learned the true name of another Sequence 0. Of course, the pretext is that the evil spirit isn't lying. It's said that the holder of the Red Priest card would seek out the underground ruins of the Tudor family due to some form of attraction, but they ended up dying in that room. This should be the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics within the same pathway, right? No, Emperor Roselle had apparently mentioned that after advancing to become a high-sequence Beyonder, possessing a corresponding card of blasphemy would allow them to subtly sense the Beyonder ingredients needed for subsequent sequences. In other words, the room where the evil spirit is sealed has a demigod-ranked characteristic of the Red Priest, path of the divine hidden within. Perhaps, the evil spirit was a demigod of this pathway when it was still alive, and it might even be a little stronger. The subtle sensation provided by the card of blasphemy is probably a result of the law of convergence. Klein suddenly thought of many things. He subconsciously turned his head to look at Sharon to see her reaction. By doing so, he could determine if she knew about the card of blasphemy and whether she understood the meaning of a Sequence 0. However, there was no change in Sharon's nearly transparent face. It was as if the evil spirit had just shown an ordinary tarot card. However, this actually implies something. When any Beyonder first come to learn of a Sequence 0, they will subconsciously think about what it represented. Perhaps only a Beyonder in the spectator pathway can read the subtle body language of Miss Sharon. Klein sighed to himself. Seeing that both of them were silent at the same time, the evil spirit gave Klein a deep glance, slowly making the projection of the card of blasphemy disappear. It once again looked at Sharon with its bloodshot eyes and said with a low and hoarse laugh, "If you are unwilling to become a demigod of the mutant pathway, then I can provide you with the Sequence 4 potion formula of the Abyss pathway." The temperance of desire and the flamboyance of malice has always been very congruous, isn't it? Sharon ignored the evil spirit's question and turned unhurriedly to Klein, leaving him to respond. What the evil spirit means is that the mutant pathway and the Abyss pathway are closely related pathways which are exchangeable at high sequences. How the Rose School of Thought and the Blood Sanctify sect act on the surface does seem very similar. Klein thought for 2 seconds and looked at the bloodied rafter pound. Then, how can your seal be removed? The evil spirit laughed and said, "Very simple. Find a direct descendant of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici family and obtain 10 milliliters of their blood, each. A little more is fine, but not less. Then mix them with holy water and pour them into my room. This way, the seal will be lifted. It's a very simple and strange method. Even in the field of mysticism, it's rare. Why must they be direct descendants of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici families? I have never heard of the last one. Sauron is the former royal family of Intis, and Einhorn is the royal family of the Faceless Empire. Both of them were loyal to the Trunsoist Empire, the angel family of the fourth epoch, and they were the final winners. However, Loans Augustus and Phaenopotter's Castilla families also meet the same conditions. Oh right, the Sauron and Einhorn family have one more thing in common, and that is their possession of the Hunter pathway. Is this the reason for them being chosen? Taking the situation from before into context, the Hunter pathway is equal to the Red Priest pathway? As he made a guess, Klein didn't conceal his doubts. I know about the Sauron and Einhorn families, but I've never heard of the Medici family. Very normal. They often enjoy hiding in the shadows. They are corrupted angels and have established an extremely secretive organization, the evil spirit said with a contemptuous tone. That organization is known as Rose Redemption. This name is very familiar. That's right, inside the abandoned temple of the true creator that was recently found by the City of Silver, there is something similar written on a corner of a mural. They suspect that it's the name of the city or the creator of the temple. Now, from the looks of it, this symbolizes an extremely secretive organization that was founded by corrupted angels. They believe in the true creator? What is their relationship with the Aurora Order? Klein pondered for a moment and said, it's related to the true creator? The evil spirit was silent for 2 seconds before asking in a low voice, you know about Rose Redemption? I heard it by chance. Klein spoke the absolute truth. The evil spirit thought for a moment, then it suddenly said with a smile, you have more secrets than I thought. Can we not talk about such things? Klein held himself back from watching Sharon's response as he wore an unperturbed look. The evil spirit's gaze swept across the two and laughed. Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true creator. It's impossible for you to imagine that certain people were once members of Rose Redemption, but they have since left it. As long as you find an organization that believes in the true creator and trace it to the very end, then there will be a chance of you coming into contact with Rose Redemption. It sounds a little like the Twilight Hermit Order, with one being the front side while the other the back side. Klein made an intuitive guess. Seeing that the evil spirit had no intention of giving an in-depth introduction to Rose Redemption, he laughed and said, do you think we can complete something like that with our strengths? The evil spirit was silent for a few seconds before saying, maybe you guys can try your luck in Beanshi Town. Beanshi Town? Where's that? Despite Klein's repeated questioning, the evil spirit refused to reveal anything else. Faced with this situation, Klein could only switch to asking, during the fourth epoch, were the Dark Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor fighting for the position of Sequence 0? When the evil spirit heard this, it was stunned for a moment before it smiled and said, it was the case, but not later. It wasn't the case after Alista Tudor went mad. Alista Tudor was that Blood Emperor? Klein sought confirmation. The evil spirit nodded. Yes, there has only been one Blood Emperor, that lunatic, Alista Tudor. Heh. The descendants of the Tudor family have all inherited the madness of that bloodline. They're usually crafty, devious, careful, and cautious, but at critical moments, they can become reckless and not consider the repercussions. The evil spirit pointed at Rafter Pound's face and said, he is an example. However, after this lesson, he will definitely become more normal for a long period of time. I've no idea if he's the last Tudor. Alista left quite a number of good things which require the blood of his descendants in order to gain access to them. It's best that you don't kill him now. The evil spirit paused and chuckled softly. All right, after you help me remove the seal, I will tell you all the stories I have experienced. No, a more accurate description is the history I've experienced. Having said that, Rafter Pound's eyes suddenly lost focus. His body twitched a few times before limply collapsing to the ground. Sharon silently watched this scene before she suddenly took a step forward. Whoosh! The wind howled as the dirt and rocks on the ground began to move before falling into the underground tunnel and sealing off the entrance. After that was done, Cline and Sharon left William Street and took a detour to another block in the silent darkness. When Cline boarded the rental carriage, Sharon's figure appeared, and she sat across from him. She looked unblinkingly at Cline as she asked with her hoarse and ethereal voice, "Will you help it lift its seal?" "No." Cline didn't hesitate to reply, and then he asked, "What about you?" Sharon shook her head, indicating that she wouldn't either. Cline heaved a sigh of relief as he smiled. "It's already been dead for about 2,000 years, and right now, it's just a remnant of an evil spirit. Dispersing or returning to the spirit world is supposed to be its end. My plan is that once we become high-sequence Beyonders, we can team up and eliminate it, giving it true deliverance." Although the Red Priest card, the hidden history of the fourth epoch, and the evil spirit's promised rewards were tempting, Cline had no confidence in it at all. In his mind, he would always recall the scene of the evil spirit's corpse sitting on a high-backed chair with its head lowered. He would also remember how the other party's face would be covered in traces of decay when he raised his head. Sharon tersely acknowledged, giving the necessary response. "Aren't you supposed to ask me why I'm so confident in becoming a high-sequence Beyonder?" Cline couldn't help but lampoon. And the answer to that question was that people needed to have dreams. Cline no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "Is the Wraith's corresponding sequence for really puppet?" Sharon nodded. "Do you have the potion formula or Beyonder ingredients?" Cline asked in thought. Sharon shook her head. Cline let out a soft chuckle. "I'll help you keep an eye out for it in my circle." Without changing her tone, Sharon said without changing her tone, "Thank you." Cline looked out of the window and muttered to himself, "I'm going to the south for a holiday." At this point, he said with a smile, as if he were speaking to a lawyer, "Jurgen, let me wish you and Merrick a happy new year in advance." Sharon was silent for 2 seconds, then she pursed her lips and replied in a fleeting voice, "Happy New Year." Her figure gradually faded and disappeared from the carriage. Looking at the little boy behind the altar and hearing his slightly hoarse and tender voice, Derek felt as if he was facing the most terrifying monster. He almost performed a downward cleave with the axe of Hurricane in his hand. From what he knew, a person who could survive in the pure darkness for so long was definitely not human. Even if he was one before, it definitely wouldn't be one after that long. Demon Hunter Collins' eyes seemed to brighten a little. He tightened his grip on his sword and asked in a calm voice, "What are you doing here?" The yellow-haired boy who called himself Jack had a pained expression as he replied, "We're looking for the holy residence of the Lord." "The holy residence of the Lord?" Colin pressed. "Right." The little boy Jack turned his head and looked at the pitch-black cross and the statue of the overturned man. "They told me that as long as I go in the direction that the Lord's eyes look in, then I will be able to reach his holy residence." "They? You still have companions?" Colin's eyes moved one full revolution as if he were a monster, taking in the surroundings. "Where are they?" Hearing this question, the little boy Jack was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he held his throat, and with a twisted, blank look on his face, he said, "I'm so hungry. So hungry." Chapter 458, An Ancient Sanguine, so hungry. Amidst his trance-like words, Jack raised his head and looked at Joshua, who was wearing a pair of scarlet-red gloves. So hungry, his mouth opened in an instant, reaching straight to his ears, revealing his neat white teeth and thick saliva that was constantly gushing out of his mouth. At the same time, he threw himself forward towards Joshua. He was so fast that he left behind an afterimage on the ground. Although Joshua was on high alert, he wasn't able to react in time. Before he could even make out what was happening, the little boy, Jack, had already pounced in front of him. Thump. The yellow-haired figure seemed to slam into an invisible wall, stopping only a step away from Joshua. Jack suspended himself in midair as a reddish glow from the darkness emerged from his body and started to corrode the transparent barrier that was denying him entry. Behind Joshua and Derek, demon hunter Colin had already fallen to one knee at some point. He had stabbed his sword, smeared with a silver ointment, into the ground. Soon after, the area around the altar instantly brightened, as if it was the purest ray of the light of dawn. Colin suddenly drew his sword, and his figure strangely split apart, turning into a series of afterimages that spread out around the altar. Every single figure raised the sword in their hands at the same time and, combined with the light of dawn in the vicinity, released a bright glow. So. One sword after another was thrust forward as the light of dawn converged towards Jack from all directions, encircling him in the middle. Under the brilliance of the rising sun, the black and red figures quickly evaporated, disappearing under the storm-like barrage of attacks. In the underground hall where the altar was located, the brilliance became abnormally bright, so bright that Derek Berg couldn't help but close his eyes. With a sudden jolt, he suddenly woke up from his slumber and saw a bonfire quietly burning in front of him and his teammates, who were diligently guarding the camp. Demon hunter Colin, who was sitting cross-legged beside a stone pillar, opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." Upon hearing this, Derek looked up at the sky and found that the frequency of lightning hadn't significantly increased. Darkness remained the ruler of this land. When he thought of the city he was about to arrive at and the temple of the fallen creator, he couldn't help but feel slightly nervous. After spending some time calming himself down, Derek quickly ate his food and recovered his combat-ready state. "I wonder what will happen in that temple." Holding the axe of Hurricane, he came to the middle of the group. Within the campsite, lanterns that were covered with a thin layer of animal hide were being lit one after another. 15 Minsk Street. Klein heated the water, adjusted the temperature, and took a comfortable bath. With the languidness after a bath, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He intended to use divination to make a confirmation about the evil spirit's matter. In the silence of the ancient palace, Klein leaned back in his chair and began to seriously consider which divination method to choose and how to design the divination statement. It had to conform to the principles of mysticism, it shouldn't involve subdivision or elimination, and it had to contain sufficient information. After a short period of silence, Klein leaned forward and wrote down what he wanted to confirm. The evil spirit in the ruins harbors strong malice towards Sharon and me. He undid the spirit pendulum on his left wrist, gripped it with one hand, and began entering cogitation. After muttering to himself for a while, he opened his eyes and looked forward. This time, the topaz pendant was wildly rotating clockwise. This meant that the evil spirit's malice was stronger than Klein had imagined. At that time, there was nothing abnormal about the spiritual intuition we had. That evil spirit is also a powerhouse that's good at interfering with divination and prophecy. He definitely wouldn't have imagined that one of us has the temperance to resist desire, preventing her from being blinded by greed, while the other has experienced too many things to know what it means to ask a tiger for its skin. With a sigh, Klein returned to the real world and laid down on his bed. Unfortunately, the heat brought by the sun brooch is only a psychological feeling and can't warm the bed. Before he fell asleep, he closed his eyes and thought with regret. South of the bridge, Rose Street, Harvest Church. After Emlyn White wiped the last chair, he straightened up and eagerly said to Father Yutravsky, "I've finished doing today's chores." "Damn old man, don't you suddenly get ideas of getting me to copy the Holy Bible?" Emlyn prayed inwardly. The object of his prayer had unwittingly changed from the moon to Earth Mother. Father Yutravsky stood there, making the vampire look like a child. He smiled and said, "Recently, you've been able to experience the joy and relaxation of working with dedication and gratitude. Go back and quietly feel the pulse of life and the pure joy that comes from it." "I haven't," Emlyn denied on reflex. Without saying anything, Father Yutravsky looked at him with a kind smile, turned and took a seat, and then began his nightly prayer. Emlyn White's lips quivered as he wanted to refute, but in the end, he failed to say anything. He silently left the Harvest Church and habitually closed the door. When he returned to his current residence, he found that the house was empty. Both his parents had disappeared without a trace. It was only after witnessing this scene that he remembered that there was going to be a Sanguine gathering in the Backland area tonight. Those fellows are really disgraceful. As noble Sanguine, they should sleep in coffins or stay in their own rooms. Why are they mimicking humans and holding all kinds of gatherings? There's even dancing. Emlyn muttered contemptuously. As he spoke, he touched his belly and swallowed a mouthful of saliva before deciding to change into some clothes to attend the gathering. The Odora family sure is enviable. They actually have a pure human partner who runs several hospitals and has fresh blood every day. They can drink as much as they want, anytime they want. Emlyn put on his black top hat and quickly walked out of the house. Westborough, in a brightly lit villa. Emlyn picked up a glass with scarlet liquid and hungrily took a gulp of it. It really has been pre-selected. He half closed his eyes, sighing in praise from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, on the dance floor, handsome men and beautiful women were dancing, twirling and taking slow steps with each other under the romantic music. What's the point of all of this? Emlyn stood at the edge of the railing on the second floor, looking down at his kinsman. As the largest city in the world, Backland had many vampires living in it. They hid in all walks of life and had completely integrated into human society. As for those who were unable to control their own destructive urges and bloodlust, they were either sent to castles deep in the mountains or were dealt with in advance to prevent the Nighthawks or other official Beyonder organizations from finding clues. As he looked at his fellow kinsmen, who were growing more spirited as the night went on, Emlyn increasingly felt like there was nothing in common between him and them. At that moment, the host of the banquet tonight, Cosme Odora, walked over with a wine cup in hand. Smiling, he asked, "Do you like tonight's wine?" Of course, its owner is young enough and possesses great vitality. Emlyn straightened his back and assumed a noble posture. Based on appearances, Cosme Odora was a very gracious middle-aged gentleman, but Emlyn knew that he was over 200 years old. He had once seen Intis under the rule of Emperor Roselle, and then he moved to Lone because he had lived for too long and feared that his neighbors would discover something was wrong about him. Upon hearing Emlyn's praise, he smiled and said, "Yes, its owner is a young lady who was stabbed by a thief and nearly lost her life. Fortunately, she met me, and this is the price she needs to pay for her recovery. You can have a taste of the wine over there, as well as the wine over there." The owners are from Balam and Fainapotter respectively. They have different flavors. Fainapotter? Mother Goddess, the humans there love chili so much that their blood has a spiciness that I can't stand. Mother Goddess, as he spoke, Emlyn suddenly paused, his expression instantly turning blank. The corner of Cosme's mouth twitched, and he pretended not to hear anything. In the awkward silence, he cleared his throat and said, "Emlyn, that's just your imagination. By the way, my grandfather wishes to meet you." "Your grandfather?" Emlyn was startled for a moment, but he then immediately widened his eyes. "Lord Nibs." Nibs Odora was a powerful Sanguine who had been active in the Fourth Epoch, but the times had corroded his life and forced him to lie in a cold coffin for extended periods of time. Cosme nodded solemnly. "Yes." With that, he turned and walked to another staircase on the second floor, not considering the possibility that Emlyn might refuse him. Emlyn followed, a little nervous and uneasy, thinking about the purpose of Lord Nibs's summons. Has he finally understood that the honor of the Sanguine is more important and has decided to help me get rid of Father Yutravsky's psychological cue? As he walked, Emlyn White developed a strong sense of hope. Following the stairs to the underground area, Emlyn White passed through a few secret doors and entered a large gray hall. In the center of the hall was a heavy coffin made of black iron, engraved with symbols and magic labels. After Cosme Odora reported Emlyn's arrival, a heavy and aged voice slowly came out from the coffin. "Emlyn White, do you know why I summoned you?" "Honorable Lord Nibs, I imagine that you are planning on helping me remove the psychological cue," Emlyn responded without hesitation. Silence reigned in the underground hall for a few seconds. Then, Nibs-Odora, who was lying in the coffin, chuckled and said, "That's one of the purposes, but it won't be me helping you. I just woke up from a long dream because I received a revelation from the ancestor." Ancestor? She has awakened? It wasn't Emlyn who exclaimed in surprise, but Cosme-Odora. After the cataclysm, doesn't the ancestor only respond to important matters? Emlyn listened in bewilderment. "No, not yet," Nibs said in a heavy voice. "The ancestor told me that the apocalypse is near and that we must prepare for it, and you, Emlyn White, are one of the key elements in the ancestor's revelation." Apocalypse? Cosme asked in surprise. But Emlyn only had one thought. I, Emlyn White, was actually mentioned by the ancestor. I am a key element for the Sanguine survival of the apocalypse. Nibs ignored his grandson's question and continued, "Emlyn White, I'll hand you a task right now. Please speak." Emlyn felt that he was being too modest. Even after hearing what had just been said, he didn't show any arrogance in front of Lord Nibs. Nibs-Odora solemnly said, "Find a chance to pray to the fool." Ah. Emlyn suspected he had heard wrongly. Nibs lowered his voice and added, "The fool whose honorific name has only recently been spread." Chapter 459, Letting a Chance Slip. Although I have always had the urge to pray to the fool to get rid of the psychological cue that Father Yutravsky gave me, I also know, very clearly, that it's dangerous to recite the honorific name of an unknown being. Not all hidden existences will start with bait and slowly provide guidance. In such matters, they are often like sharks in the sea, who would go mad and lurch forward once they smell blood. But now, Lord Nibs, no, what does the ancestor want? Emlyn White said, finding it rather ridiculous, "It will be very, very, very dangerous." Inside the black iron coffin, Nibs-Odora replied with an aged voice, "Yes, under normal circumstances. But not all hidden existences are filled with malice. Among them, they will similarly abide to rules and enjoy transactions. For example, the 7 pure lights of the spirit world. Since the ancestor has given such a revelation, it means that the danger that the fool can bring is not too serious or even none. And during this entire process, I will always be by your side to protect you. Don't you want to get rid of the psychological cue? Have you already become a believer of Earth Mother and abandoned the moon?" "No, I haven't," Emlyn frantically denied. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, "I wish to have a few days to think it over." "All right, no problem. I believe that you will make a choice that suits your noble identity as a member of the Sanguine." Inside the coffin, Nibs's voice turned soft as he smiled and comforted him. After sending Emlyn White back to the second floor, Cosme-Odora once again returned to the dark and gloomy underground hall, and he asked with confusion and doubt, "Grandfather, how could the revelation given by the ancestor involve Emlyn White? He's just a weak member of the Sanguine who only recently reached adulthood." Nibs's voice came through the thick black metal coffin lid and reverberated in the air. "No, the revelation provided by the ancestor never included Emlyn White. She only showed a scene of the dawn of the apocalypse, depicting the erosion of the crimson moon, as well as mentioning the fool and the corresponding honorific name. During this process, no Sanguine appeared. The mention of the key element was just my way of convincing Emlyn White. However, being able to take risks for the future of the Sanguine can also be considered a key element." Cosme was first enlightened before he had another question. "Why did you choose Emlyn White? What's so special about him?" Nibs-Odora suddenly laughed. "Hasn't he been clamoring about praying to the fool all this time? Didn't he think that we weren't putting too much weight on his problem, that we aren't willing to antagonize Bishop Yutravsky, so he was trying to find other help? I'm just fulfilling his wish." For a long time, Cosme was speechless. Emlyn White stood at the railing of the second floor, looked down at his tireless kinsman, and nervously took a sip of his wine. "Up to this day, I haven't heard of any terrible outcome for people who prayed to the fool. Perhaps it's just as Lord Nibs said, the fool is just like the 7 pure lights in the spirit world, a hidden existence that maintains order and is warm-hearted." "Wait a minute, What are the 7 pure lights in the spirit world? Why haven't I ever heard of them before? They seem to be on the side of good. I wonder if this will be any help to me. In short, the fool isn't necessarily dangerous, and there is Lord Nibs protecting me. Maybe I can take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the psychological cue. Emlyn consoled himself with fear and anticipation. Monday morning. Sherwood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. Klein squatted in front of the toilet, holding a brush and carefully cleaning the dirt inside it. According to his schedule, after completing his visits on Saturday and Sunday, he decided to take a day off and wait until tomorrow to report back to Prince Edisac about the final results and hand over the assignment. But during what should have been his relaxation time, he found the house a little too messy and dirty. It was only when he saw this that he remembered that the cleaning of the house had been done twice a week through the temporary employment of the landlady's maid next door. As the Sammers had gone on holiday to Seville City in Desi Bay, one of the maids had gone along with them, while another had returned to the countryside after receiving a year-end bonus. 15 Minsk Street, where he lived, hadn't been cleaned by anyone for quite some time. Klein had planned to put up with it for 2 days since he was leaving Backlund, but in his free time, he didn't dare to take the time to head to the Quelag Club to have fun. He was afraid of infuriating Prince Edisac, so he could only stay home. Hence, seeing the things that irked him, he changed into his old clothes and began spring cleaning before the new year. He went on to scrub the toilet, wash the bathtub, wipe the windows, mop the floors, clean his equipment, and wash clothes. Klein busied himself from 8 to 11 before barely completing his desired cleanup. Of course, he only did it perfunctorily without that much attention to detail. Sometimes, renting too big a house isn't a good thing. Klein washed his hands and wiped his face with a towel. Walking out of the bathroom and looking at the clean and tidy living room and dining room, and watching the sunlight pierce through the clouds and shine through the transparent glass window, showering golden spots in his house, he had a strange sense of accomplishment. He felt a lot happier. Time to reward myself for lunch. I'll find a good restaurant. Klein returned to the second floor and changed his clothes. As he leafed through the papers, waiting for lunchtime, the doorbell rang. It's almost the new year, and there are still people coming to entrust me with missions? As he rose and walked to the door, Klein made up his mind to decline. Although he only had £34 left in cash, in order to get out of the royal strife, he had to go on vacation to the south as soon as possible. He could no longer accept assignments. To his surprise, the visitor wasn't a stranger, but the old butler of Prince Edisac. The old butler was wearing a well-cut tuxedo. He saluted without losing his dignity, and said, "Detective Moriarty, His Highness, the Prince, is waiting for you in the carriage at the end of the street. He wishes to know the progress of your investigations." So impatient? All right, that saves me the trouble of going all the way to Red Rose Manor tomorrow. Klein quickly reorganized what he had thought of last night and calmly replied, "All right." He was about to remove his hat from the coat rack when he felt a sudden ache in his stomach, a pain that required him to visit the toilet. After enduring for a while, he realized that he couldn't hold it in any longer and apologetically said to the old butler, "I'm very sorry. I'll need to use the bathroom first. My stomach isn't feeling well." The old butler didn't show any abnormal expression. "That's your freedom." As he discharged one wave after another of bliss, clearing away the remnants in his stomach, Klein washed his hands and returned to the hall. At that moment, he noticed that the old butler was no longer around. The one waiting outside was the maid with curly brown hair. "His Highness requested me to apologize to you. He still has matters to attend to and cannot wait for too long. Please go to Red Rose Manor tomorrow or the afternoon of the day after tomorrow." The maid bowed meticulously. "It hasn't even been 10 minutes, and I'd already done it as fast as I could. Usually, I can continue on for quite a while if I have newspapers." Klein smiled. "No problem." After receiving a response, the maid who had completed her mission immediately felt a weight off her chest. She giggled and said, "Detective Moriarty, you missed that lady again." "Huh?" Klein was at a loss. The maid lowered her voice and said, "This time, the young lady came with His Highness. She was the one who suggested taking a detour to meet you. In the end, I missed her because of my stomachache. Something isn't right." Klein frowned slightly. In a room padded with a thick and soft carpet, a quill that was being held came to a pause and stopped writing. In the open notebook beneath it, there were lines of text and marks of scribbled out text, scribbles. Target attempted to escape control, but unfortunately, Detective Sherlock Moriarty leaves before she heads downstairs. The target influenced the surrounding maids, but Prince Edisac's butler, Funkel, chanced upon the problem and dealt with it. Scribbles, the target went off track once again. She participated in Talam's funeral on behalf of Prince Edisac. However, having quickly recovered to her normal state, she realized that she was unable to identify Sherlock Moriarty, and she could only let a chance slip. Sherlock Moriarty went to Red Rose Manor to investigate, but the timing wasn't right, and the target happened to be riding horses on the golf course. Scribbles, the target, once again, triumphed over the arrangement, encouraging Prince Edisac to visit Detective Sherlock Moriarty. Unfortunately, Sherlock Moriarty happened to have a stomachache, ended up staying in the bathroom for 7 minutes and 45 seconds, and the prince couldn't afford to wait. His facial features were like a sculpture, but the middle-aged man who was blinded in one eye put down his quill and looked at a woman. "What exactly did you put on her body? Breaking through the restrictions time and time again will create big problems." The woman laughed in a low voice and said, "It was just an accident. Don't worry, there won't be any problems." As she spoke, she pulled back her hair, revealing her long, white neck. After that, she slowly applied various things to her face, making her look even more alluring. Seeing that she was putting on her clothes and accessories, the dark golden-haired middle-aged man frowned and asked, "Where are you going?" The woman didn't directly answer and said with a smile, "Be careful of the quill in your hand, you almost exchanged bodies with someone the last time." "You don't need to remind me," the middle-aged man with deep blue eyes to the point of being black said with a straight face. The woman tightened her belt to make herself look thinner, then she lazily stretched and yawned while covering her mouth. "I'm going to pay a visit to Mr. A of the Aurora Order. I hope he's as crazy as the rumors say." As she spoke, the expression of the blind middle-aged man suddenly sank. It was because that ordinary quill had begun to write on its own, as though an invisible hand was holding onto it. Chapter 460, Cyclic Explorations. Above the gray fog, the ancient temple-like building stood quietly. After noticing some abnormalities in the series of coincidences, Klein entered the mysterious space after lunch, in an attempt to confirm a guess in his mind. He picked up a fountain pen he conjured, paused for 2 seconds, and then wrote, "I am involved in a series of coincidences created by sealed artifact 0-08. Putting down the dark red pen, Klein held the silver chain in his left hand and began his divination. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at the spirit pendulum just inches away from him. The topaz pendant stood still without any rotations. This meant that the divination had failed. Divination cannot be completed, possibly due to not fulfilling sufficient conditions, or it could be because 0-08 is resisting it. In both cases, a similar result would occur. Klein changed his statement and tried to direct it at different targets, but all of them failed. He tapped the edge of the long model table with his finger, hesitating on whether he should go to Red Rose Manor the day after tomorrow. If there's no 0-08 or a similar power to arrange these matters, then my sudden escape will definitely raise Prince Edisac's suspicion. No, my escape might not be successful. Prince Edisac's men live next door. Of course, since I'm already a Faceless, it's easy for me to find a chance to escape when I'm out, but is there a need to go this far? Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be able to leave Backland without attracting too much attention by honestly seeking an audience with Prince Edisac and normally handing over the mission. His Highness will likely not force me, an unaffiliated Beyonder, to accomplish too difficult a task. If there really is a sealed artifact or demigod like 0-08 influencing the recent events, then from my past experience, I should just be a side character who mistakenly entered the stage and haven't received enough attention. In this case, escaping is tantamount to telling the other party that I have detected your presence. I'm highly problematic. In this way, relying on my faceless powers wouldn't necessarily allow me to escape the attention that has locked onto me. The best method would be to calmly go to the Red Rose Manor and go through the normal procedures to exit the stage. After graciously bowing from the curtain call, I'll fade away from the attention of the unknown party. After combining the two elements, Klein finally decided to pretend that he hadn't discovered anything and to leave Backlund according to plan. The bonfire in the campsite was burning with flames, and there was someone standing guard inside the campsite the entire time. Derek Berg leaned against a stone pillar and slept to recover his strength. At this moment, he was dreaming of the endless grayish-white fog, an ancient chair situated at the highest point in the center, as well as the indifferent figure sitting on that chair, overlooking everything. Mr. Fool. Derek said the name in a chanting manner in his mind. Following that, he heard the fool's voice. Prepare for the gathering. Yes, Mr. Fool. Derek answered silently and began counting his heartbeats. His eyes never opened, as if everything that had just happened was just a prelude to a dream. There's still quite a bit of time before we set off. There's enough time to attend the tarot gathering, he thought with relief. He originally imagined that he, who had joined the exploratory team, would miss this gathering. After 1,000 heartbeats, Derek waited a little longer before he felt himself entering that quiet and serene divine hall. The moment he opened his eyes, scenes flashed through his mind. It was as if an external force had instantly injected all his lost memories into his head once again. The scenes were crumbling city walls, buildings crisscrossed with white and blue, the temple of the fallen creator with a similar architectural style as the City of Silver, murals detailing the approaching apocalypse and the fallen creator's protection of the remaining humans from the 6 great evil gods, the beautiful and dangerous mushrooms, and Jack, the eerie pale yellow-haired boy of unknown origins. These kinds of scenes had repeated over and over again for a total of 5 times, but each time there was a slight difference in the details. The first time, outside the fallen creator's temple, all of the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished, nearly causing a tragedy. The second time, someone lost control of themselves and almost swallowed up a mushroom. Fortunately, Chief Colin stopped them in time. The third time, the little boy, Jack, told a story, which was that he and his father had been searching for the creator's holy residence in the endless ocean, and they ended up encountering a huge storm. The fourth time, Joshua was severely injured by Jack, who had mutated without any warning. The fifth time, the temple completely collapsed, blocking the exit of the underground area. And all of these occurrences ended with Demon Hunter Colin killing the little boy, Jack, and then started off with their rest in the camp, preparing to enter the ruined city. The beginning and end were connected as it repeated in a cycle. We've explored the temple 5 times. We have been living through this experience all this time, and there is no way to truly end it. The more Derek understood his sudden new memories, the more frightened and terrified he became. Audrey, who was sitting on the other side of the long bronze table, originally wanted to greet Mr. Fool and the others with a cheerful and light voice as usual. However, when she glanced over, she immediately noticed that little Son's mood wasn't right. She immediately asked, "Mr. Son, did something happen? Has the exploration of the true, fallen creator's temple not gone smoothly?" Derek seemed to have grabbed onto hope as he hurriedly described the rough situation once. When he was done, he said, "After that little boy was dealt with by His Excellency, we all closed our eyes and woke up in the campsite outside the city in preparation to begin a brand new exploration. We no longer had any memories from before. This process has been repeated 5 times, with only the details being slightly different. If it wasn't for Mr. Fool's alerting me to this, then I wouldn't have even known that I've been living a recurring life all this time." He took it for granted that the extra memories from his arrival above the gray fog were the result of Mr. Fool's reminder. He stood up and gave a solemn salute to the blurry figure seated at the head of the long bronze table. "I only understood the situation after listening to your description." Klein was still in a daze. He maintained his original posture and lightly nodded his head in response. In a situation where the reasons are unknown, a superior wouldn't so easily express his opinion, so I can't rashly open my mouth. Klein secretly reviewed what he had learned from his past life as a keyboard warrior. Seeing that Mr. Fool seemed to be an imperturbable ancient wall, Derek felt a lot more at ease and felt that the matter could finally be resolved. He turned to look at the hanged man, the world, justice, and the magician, and he sincerely asked, "Do you know the root of the problem? How can this be resolved?" The zealous Audrey instinctively wanted to answer, but she found herself without a clue or even a guess. Furs was in a similar state as she was. Filled with rich knowledge from Earth and having read many novels of being stuck in the same day, Klein originally wanted to control the world, to give out ideas, to give everyone some inspiration to consider regarding the matter, but after thinking about it carefully, he chose to stay low-key and prepared to observe first. After listening to the son's description, Alger remained silent for a long time. At this moment, he said in a measured tone, "I can only think of two possibilities. First, you have encountered a nightmare or hallucinatory power at a level that exceeds a demigod. After regaining your memories with Mr. Fool's help, you should be able to immediately detect something amiss once you return to the real world. That way, the problem will easily be resolved. Second, you were forced to or you proactively entered a strange space or state at a particular node where time is controlled to flow in a certain manner, but the time is fixed within a certain range which is cyclical and the continuation is balanced, that is to say, it is relatively static. In this situation, there aren't many ways to end the cycle. Either there is an external force that can forcefully break the balance, or you find the key point that connects the distortion of time. An external force that can forcefully break the balance?" Upon hearing this, Audrey, Furs, and Derek all subconsciously glanced at the calm and leisurely Mr. Fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table. "No, I can't always seek Mr. Fool's help. By not saying anything directly, he probably wishes to test my ability at dealing with such matters." After a moment of thought, he said, "Mr. Hanged Man, let's assume the second situation. In your opinion, what do you think is the key point that connects the distortion of time?" Without waiting for the hanged man to respond, Audrey guessed with interest, "That little boy Jack? You can't kill him when you're facing him?" Alger nodded. "That's a possibility." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "The son's description of Jack and his father reminds me of a particular incident." He turned to look at Miss Justice. "Didn't I once mention that I was pursuing a listener of the Aurora Order at sea? The goal for his voyage was to seek the true Creator's holy residence." Audrey carefully recalled and said without any strong confirmation, "That seems to be the case." Alger immediately said with a deep voice, "That listener also brought his son, and the son's age is very close to the son's description of Jack. Are you saying that Jack went from your world to the vicinity of the City of Silver?" Derek asked, stunned. After a short period of settling down, he inwardly felt an indescribable sense of happiness. This means that the City of Silver hasn't been completely sealed off yet. There's still a chance to connect with the normal world where the Hanged Man and Justice are from. I can only say that it is possible. The Hanged Man couldn't give an affirmative answer. He thought for a moment and suggested, "You can find a chance to bring up the Sonia Sea, the Lone Kingdom, and the port city in front of Jack. Perhaps there will be a different reaction, but of course, try to avoid doing so in front of the chief of your City of Silver as much as possible. Also, the key point doesn't necessarily lie with Jack. We have to consider other possibilities as well. You should tell us the specifics, such as the details of the mural, and maybe we can find something useful." At this point, Alger began to look forward to receiving information. Chapter 461, The Kind and Enthusiastic Hanged Man. Unlike the past, Derek was clearly smarter. He didn't clumsily rely only on words to provide a description. After receiving Mr. Fool's permission, he conjured a series of scenes from the memories that he could recall. He showed the exploratory process and the points he found important to the Hanged Man, Justice, the Magician, and the world in a fragmented fashion, and then he included some explanations for them. The walls that had collapsed in the darkness, the streets that passed through the destroyed buildings, the stone pillar-propped white and blue ancient temple that was covered in dust under the light of the animal hide lantern, the statue that hung upside down from a pitch-black cross, the series of murals depicting the fallen creator who suffered from the sin in place of humanity, the exceptionally alluring mushrooms, the statue at the altar that had strangely opened its eyes, and the young, yellow-haired Jack who had been hiding in the back. All these scenes took shape and were reflected in the eyes of the Tarot Club members in the most direct and realistic manner. The gloomy and dark tone, the sense of crisis with every step that was taken, and the bizarre development that the son was experiencing made Audrey rather excited. She became extremely interested in what he was saying. This is the situation around the City of Silver. It's more attractive than any novel I've ever read. This is the charm of mystery, uncertainty, and terror combined. Of course, to the humans who live there, this isn't a good thing. Audrey's thoughts were in disarray. She wanted nothing more than to immediately become a powerhouse at the level of a demigod and venture into that region ruled by darkness and storms. Klein watched and sighed emotionally. He was sighing because it truly wasn't easy for the City of Silver to last all this time in such an environment. He sighed because little son still wasn't smart enough and had no experience. Otherwise, he would have been able to completely present the events that happened in the form of a movie or documentary. It would certainly be exciting and attractive. However, this way, the description would take too long. My spirituality wouldn't be able to endure if everyone were to watch such a movie. Also, the longer one stays above the gray fog, the more likely it is that something bad will happen in the outside world. Klein suddenly felt lucky. Alger finished watching in silence as he thought over it. He got the son to pick a few important points he had chosen to present them above the long bronze table. Among them included the mural of the fallen creator resisting the 6 evil gods. Which evil gods are these? Alger looked at the octopus with lightning wrapped around its body, black waves at its feet, an avian feathered cloak on its back, and a 3-pronged trident in its hand as he began to make connections. Derek shook his head honestly. I don't know. I thought you would know them. Audrey and Furs cast their gazes over at the same time, carefully observing them several times, but they still failed to come up with any guesses. They had originally thought that these were 6 of the 8 ancient gods from the legends of the City of Silver, but they couldn't find a suitable match. After all, there was a dragon, an elf, a giant, a phoenix, and an annihilation demonic wolf, while there was only one giant in the mural. This. The fool took a serious look and his pupils nearly contracted. In consideration of his standing, he had only taken a cursory look at the mural in the beginning, but now, he finally realized that something was wrong. This is very similar to the statues of the 6 gods which I saw in the Tudor family's underground ruin, except that one is a normal version and the other is a corrupted version. It really is a bit hard for people to look at it directly, especially Earth Mother, Lord of Storms, and Eternal Blazing Sunday. Not only have they been sullied as evil gods, but they're even akin to ugly monsters. Klein didn't feel a sense of sudden enlightenment from having realized the truth. He had expected the true creator to disparage the 6 gods and distort their images. However, I can't completely ignore the possibility of this mural appearing. Just like how I had always thought that the Orthodox gods didn't have a human form, with only symbols left. As a result, the statues in the ruins of the Tudor family have made me less certain. It seems like the establishment of the images of the gods have undergone a long evolution, and many secrets are hidden within. Klein was relieved when he saw that Miss Justice was focusing on examining the mural and didn't pay attention to Mr. Fool's attitude. Because it involved whether or not little son could get out of the strange predicament of repeating that short period of life, he decided to tell them what he knew. Of course, the long introduction and display of the images of the 6 gods inside the underground ruin didn't fit the identity of the fool. He intended to control the world to complete this task. And this was in line with his goal of making the world and Sherlock Moriarty equivalent. The fool should enigmatically say, Evernight, Sun, Storm, Wisdom, Earth, Giant, and then give no explanation, with superfluous descriptions. Klein thought for 2 seconds and let the world say in a hoarse voice, I've seen similar statues. After attracting everyone's gaze, he paused and added, in an adventure to a 4th epoch ruin. Audrey was very interested, but she maintained her basic level of restraint. Mr. World, what kind of statues were there? Can you show it to us? Of course, if you aren't willing to, or if you require compensation, it's negotiable. There's no need, as this might also solve some of my doubts. The World smiled darkly. He acted by making a request to Mr. Fool, and when he got permission, he conjured the statues of the 6 gods and their corresponding sacred emblems. With her head against the full moon, the lady, who wore layers upon layers of hazy dresses that didn't repeat, gave off an exceptionally beautiful feeling. On her long black skirt, there were also specks of starlight, as if it were a night sky, and on top of that iconic Evernight sacred emblem. Audrey immediately recognized her to be the Evernight goddess she worshipped. This statue was most similar to the evil god in the upper left corner of the mural, but its face was more human, and there were no strange eyes hidden around it. What sacrilege! This is sacrilegious to the goddess. Audrey was a little angry, but she quickly calmed down. As the most infamous evil god, it's expected that the true creator would let his followers disfigure the goddess. But, why would there be a humanoid sculpture of the goddess in the underground ruins? Isn't it said that the Orthodox gods only have symbols? Audrey frowned slightly, lost in thought. Alger felt somewhat enlightened as he said with a sigh, so the murals depict the distorted images of the 6 gods. They've really had humanoid images in the past. Perhaps this is the reason why the churches have always been trying to find the forsaken land of the gods. As for the forsaken land of the gods, it's most likely hidden in the depths of the Sonia Sea. Yes, it definitely doesn't exist in a normal state, otherwise, it would be impossible for the deities to not notice it. Alger added silently inwardly. The son was first taken aback before he came to a realization. Mr. Hanged Man, are these the deities that all of you mentioned before, the Evernight goddess, the Lord of Storms? Yes, the Hanged Man gave an affirmative answer. What do they have to do with the apocalypse? What does it have to do with our land being forsaken by the Lord? Derek subconsciously pressed. Unfortunately, no one could answer him. Furs raised her hand in confusion. Why is there no god of steam and machinery? This was the god she believed in. In the northern and southern continents, the 7 gods had always been equal. Rumor has it that the god of steam and machinery, also known as the god of craftsmanship, wasn't born until the 4th epoch. From the looks of it, it's true, and the time node at which he was born seems to be in the late 4th epoch, not in the early or mid 4th epoch, the Hanged Man said, a mixture of explanations and guesses. He had an unconcealable enthusiasm for such topics. So that's the case. Furs felt a little guilty as she had never read the Steam and Machinery Bible seriously, and her faith appeared as just a way of life. Derek didn't harp on the previous matter and instead asked, is this mural the key point? Perhaps, you can try to break it, but don't let the chief suspect you. The Hanged Man was about to say that he shouldn't attempt to pronounce the honorific names of one of the 6 gods, or else he or they might directly descend into the forsaken land of the gods, but after careful consideration, he realized that the little son didn't know the corresponding honorific names at all. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. You're always so kind and enthusiastic. Also, Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Mr. World, you are similarly as kind-hearted. Derek thanked them sincerely. Kind? Enthusiastic? The Hanged Man was momentarily unsure of how to react. This was the first time that someone had used such words to describe him. After the discussion was over, Klein suddenly remembered something. In the previous exploration of the abandoned temple of the true creator, the City of Silver found the name Rose Redemption. However, it didn't seem to pay attention to this. It can't be ignored. According to the evil spirit in the underground ruin, this extremely secretive organization is an organization led by fallen angels, and it is in no way inferior to the Twilight Hermit Order. Perhaps that cyclic time was set up by them. Thinking of this, the fool, who was sitting upright in a high-back chair, leisurely adjusted his posture and used his fingers to lightly tap the edge of the long, model table. Audrey immediately turned her head and looked at Mr. Fool in excitement, waiting for him to give a hint. The Hanged Man, the Sun, the Magician, and the world also looked expectantly at Mr. Fool. Amid the fog, Klein chuckled and said, "Rose Redemption." Rose Redemption? What is that? The key point to getting out of this predicament? That's right, there's such a name in the corner of a mural near the top of the temple. Derek seemed to understand something. Alger, Audrey, and Furs also recalled and gave the name Rose Redemption high importance, but they didn't fully understand the true meaning that Mr. Fool was trying to convey. Honorable Mr. Fool, what does Rose Redemption represent? Audrey raised her hand and took the initiative to ask. This time, Klein didn't respond other than giving a short laugh. His idea was very simple. The organization, the Rose Redemption, was intricately tied to the true creator. No matter what happened in the temple, it would always point to them in some way. As for whether this name was a so-called key point, Klein wasn't sure or worried. After all, he held the right to interpretation. If the Sun and the others misunderstood the real meaning, how could it be Mr. Fool's fault? Chapter 462, What is a Miracle? Seeing the Fool chuckling silently, Audrey and the others had no choice but to withdraw their gaze and stop asking questions. In a situation like this where they were only given hints and not explanations, they didn't find it problematic. Existences at the level of deities typically had similar habits, and sometimes, what they gave weren't even hints, but revelations. In the eyes of a powerful figure like Mr. Fool, just providing a single name is enough. Our failure to comprehend things is because we are lacking. We need to work harder at figuring out and attempting things. Audrey was increasingly looking forward to her future as a psychiatrist. I remember that there was something related to Rose Redemption in that semi-abandoned temple. Alger tilted his head and looked at the sun. Without any hesitation, Derek nodded and said, yes. It was text derived from Jotun in a corner of the murals. We used quite some time to decipher those words. Text derived from Jotun. Alger hadn't paid much attention to this detail before, but he couldn't help but make connections at that moment in time. That little boy, Jack, seems to have gone there from the Sonia Sea. Text derived from Jotun. Alger deliberated before making a request to conjure a line of text. Those words were in ancient Faceless, the origins of the northern continent's language, and they meant, Rose Redemption. Derek took a closer look and was stunned. It's very close, but the way that the words end is handled differently. Mr. Hanged Man, is this a language from where you come from? As he spoke, Derek conjured the text on the mural again. Yes. Alger gave an affirmative answer. This language itself has evolved. The one you found should be of an earlier type. In the world of linguistics, this type of language, which is similar to ancient Faceless, is widely regarded as a characteristic of the Solomon Empire. Historian Klein gave the most accurate answer in his mind. Alger paused. What about the content of the corresponding mural? I wasn't in charge of that area, and I didn't take a careful look before departing. Derek instantly felt ashamed. Alger nodded without a change in expression. Find a chance to clarify this. There might be a crucial point hidden within. All right. Derek was increasingly convinced that things weren't so bad after all. Seeing that he had relaxed quite a bit, Audrey was a little curious and a little puzzled as she asked, Mr. Hanged Man, if that young boy named Jack is the child of the listener you described, why would he be able to communicate with the sun and the others? After discussing the corresponding terms for Rose Redemption, she was completely certain that the City of Silver used a different language compared to the other countries in the northern and southern continent like Lone. And above the gray fog, everyone is able to communicate fluently, without any gaps in communication. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's powers. Audrey praised in her heart. Alger scoffed as he looked at her. Miss Justice, you haven't experienced any Beyonder events, have you? Jack has already become such a terrifying monster, so what else can't he change? Trust me, there are times when language knowledge is very easy to obtain, with it taking just a second or two. Audrey blinked, feeling that she had once again exposed that she didn't have much experience or knowledge in mysticism. After this matter came to a close, the tarot gathering resumed as per the usual schedule. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table and said, "Mr. Fool, this time there are 3 more Roselle diary pages. I still owe you 7. Upon hearing that, Furs hurriedly added, "Mr. Fool, I also received some responses. There will be new Roselle diary pages the next time." "Very well." Klein chuckled in response. By the side, Derek suddenly felt ashamed again, because he hadn't had time to visit the library last week to look through any material and memorize historical details due to his participation in the exploratory team. After a simple process, Klein picked up the 3 diary pages which were conjured, and he began to read with great anticipation. August 8th. For the first time, I was invited to the White Maple Palace to attend a ball held by His Majesty. These aristocrats are really fucking extravagant, with the food they eat completely being in pursuit of novelty. Things like grilled swans, sheep's testicles. I have to say, I was very surprised at the beginning. The aristocrats of this world, yes, this is limited only to aristocrats, really love cleanliness. It's common for them to take baths, and toilet paper has already taken a nascent form. They totally aren't like the aristocrats of Earth's Middle Ages. I originally thought that this was an effect of the existence of true gods, but I was later informed that this was an improvement that had to be made because of some kind of threat. Beyonders of a particular sequence are able to spread the plague through dirty habits. I wonder which pathway and sequence that is. At that time, my first thought was that there's something wrong with these aristocrats' brains, right? Since they're afraid of the plague, why don't they clean up the streets? Why didn't they build a complete sewage system? Why don't they uplift the slums? They're all in the same city. Does this mean that this place will be fine when there's a plague over there? Well, with water sources, food, and people isolated and them moving only in one direction, perhaps it really will be all right. But there are plagues that can be transmitted through the air. When I hold a high position, I must push for urban planning and clean up the environment. Even without the plague, just living in such a stinking city is still very annoying. Oh right, I've been summoned tonight by His Majesty. I thought that since I was born on Earth, I, who received an education of all men being equal, would be neither humble nor arrogant and appear rather calm. But in fact, I remained very nervous and excited, unconsciously bending my waist and bowing my head. Of course, I know that in terms of dignity, I'm equal to the king. This is the charm of power. Even though this entire page is filled with daily activities, the emperor has still managed to make me laugh. He was also someone with a goal. Indeed, even for someone born in the modern world, they will still become apprehensive and sycophantic when faced with someone of high status, a person who can influence their fates. Klein smiled, his mood much more relaxed. He turned to the second page and continued reading. November 11th. About to advance to sequence 4 to become a demigod. After this, as long as I don't lose control, then my life's natural order will experience a qualitative change. I would no longer be a short-lived creature. Of course, different sequences of different pathways will be in different states. I faced 2 choices. One is alchemist of the savant pathway, and the other is mysticologist of the mystery prior pathway. Eventually, I chose not to change pathways since the hidden sage is a very dangerous existence. However, I ultimately suspect that he isn't a real deity. Perhaps he is of a slightly lower level. After becoming an alchemist, I will be able to inject soul into the items I create and give them life. This is the feeling of being a creator. It will definitely be excellent. It's also the reason why I continued choosing this Beyonder pathway. After obtaining this sequence's Beyonder characteristic, I should be able to complete more of my concepts. There will come a day when the saying, "It's not that we aren't working hard, it's just that the cheat has a Gundam." It will be a Gundam in the truest meaning of the word. The only problem is that the corresponding ritual of alchemist needs to extract all the life force of a particular region, desertification of the land and the drying of lakes. Why is this not much different from a cult sacrificial ritual? I've always felt that the potion sequence system has too many dark and crazy parts to it. Occasionally, it would be so evil that it can make one despair. The Emperor also feels the same way. Seeing this, Klein couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes, he also felt that the background color of this world was grayish-black and crazy. Things like the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, the laws of pathway convergence, and interchangeability of close sequences all bring about change that leads to tragedy. Alchemist is a very interesting sequence. Alchemical life sounds forbidden and is a domain very close to that of deities. I wonder if the Emperor made any Gundams before he was assassinated. Probably not. Klein's thoughts drifted away for a moment. He was rather curious about the ritual of becoming a demigod-like high-sequence Beyonder. Unfortunately, Roselle didn't record much of it. After all, it was a diary, not a notebook. Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior Pathway sounds good too. Klein turned over the second diary page and displayed the third page in front of him. April 23rd. This bunch of aristocrats really are a mess. I even thought that Ma'am Karen had seduced me for sex because she had taken a fancy for my inner self. But who knew that her husband, the Earl of Champagne, was peeping in the opposite room? He was even thrilled and even fucking wanted to fuck me. You're reading on all novel full thanks. I'm sorry, but I just can't accept it, so I had to kick him out of the room. Compared to their family, I'm just a pure child. Klein was momentarily speechless. He felt that the private life of Emperor Roselle was really filled with excitement and that many of the Intis aristocracy were also sufficiently eccentric. If some aristocrat tries to seek novelty and finds a curly-haired baboon, some kind of disease might even be born. Klein sighed and looked down. April 25th. To cultivate my character and hone my mind, I went fishing at Swan Lake. I hope that one day I can go fishing at sea for a mermaid. Sigh, I've been quite depraved recently. I have to invigorate my spirit and invent more things. I can't leave any gaps. Since I transmigrated to this world, I will brand this era with my name. Emperor, it's better if you had fallen into depravity. Klein's mouth twitched without any intention of making comment. Then, he calmly looked at the last diary entry on the last page. April 26th. Zeradal came visiting. I deliberately asked him what a miracle was. He asked me in return about what I thought it was. What I think it is? There is only one miracle in my heart, and that is the wonders of civilization. For example, the great Twilight Hall of the Faceless Empire, the former residence of the giant king, Ormer. Zeradal finally gave a direct answer. He said, "What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead." Chapter 463, Answering His Own Questions. A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead? Klein suddenly remembered what had happened to him. The head injury of a man who shot himself in the head miraculously healing, a Beyonder who, having died from having his heart crushed, crawled out of his grave in the middle of the night. Are these considered miracles of being resurrected from the dead? Is this the miracle the leader of the secret order, Zeradal, spoke of? And sequence 2 of the seer pathway is called a miracle invoker. At this moment, Klein felt like he had grasped something important, but he was unable to piece together all the clues to form the truth he wanted. As I had guessed before, there are other factors at work for my choice of having seer as my beginning sequence. My greatest support is the mysterious space above the gray fog, which happens to eliminate all interference and provides seers the most coveted environment. My characteristic of resurrection also seems to have come from the gray fog as well. When I came to Backlund, the events in which Nimblewright Master Rosago was involved in were naturally drawn to me, which is consistent with the convergence of Beyonder characteristics of the same pathway. The higher quality it is, the stronger the attraction as the effects appear intermittently. The sudden change in the Antigonus family notebook style of passing key information to me, related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range via the misfortune cloth puppet, might also be a result of such elements. Combined with the other miscellaneous phenomena, Does it mean that this mysterious space has a very close relationship with the Seer Beyonder pathway? That this is a Grade 0 sealed artifact of the corresponding sequence? Or perhaps it's a divine kingdom left behind by a sequence 0 of the same pathway. There's also the possibility of it being the so-called uniqueness of the Seer pathway. Klein moved his gaze away from Roselle's diary, his anticipation for advancing to a high sequence Beyonder increasing. He wondered what he would discover in the hidden area after he completed the staircase of light. Perhaps the reason for my transmigration and the way home will be found there. He suppressed his excitement and allowed Roselle's diary pages to disappear from his hands. At the same time, he became increasingly wary of the leader of the secret order, Zeradal. He was a powerful existence that had long since become a miracle invoker from the Seer pathway many years ago. There might be times and matters that have his fingerprints hidden all over them. Although all of these thoughts were churning in his mind, Klein acted as though nothing had happened as he calmly said, "You can begin your transactions." Furs immediately turned to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side of the table, and she said with expectation, "I have received a reply. My teacher has a pair of mirror dragon eyes. The price is £1,000. Upon saying that, Furs felt a little uneasy. This was because Dorian Gray Abraham's reserve price was £800, which was already at a premium above the usual £500 to £600. And on that foundation, she had added another £200. After attending so many tarot gatherings and all kinds of Beyonder circles, I finally understand one thing. Just like Emperor Roselle said, money isn't omnipotent, but nothing can be done without money. Although I've already received the fixed payment for my new book and have savings reaching £350, there's still the Spirit Eater stomach pouch awaiting me. There's also all kinds of expenses needed for sequence 7, 6, 5, and even 4. The meaning before Mr. Fool's secret hint is that I should be able to be freed from the curse of the full moon once I become a high sequence Beyonder. Even if I can find some of them through teacher, I can't fully rely on him and the Abraham family. In this regard, saving up money on my own isn't enough, and efforts must be made to make money. The price of £1,000 is really expensive. If Miss Justice wishes to bargain, I'll later tell her that teacher agreed to lower the price by £100 after repeated negotiations. As Furs waited for the reply, she consoled herself. £1,000? Audrey never expected to receive news for the psychiatrist potion ingredients so quickly, so she subconsciously asked in a confirming tone. Without waiting for a reply from Furs, she happily added, "Okay, deal." Although she still owed Viscount Glaint a final installment and still owed the Fool's Adorer £2,000, she would officially be declared an adult at the New Year's ball. Not only would her control over her wealth be greater than ever before, but she would also receive many valuable gifts, such as the one promised by her father, Earl Hall, a few days earlier. He had promised to give his dear daughter a further £50,000 in Backlund Bank shares and more than £2,000 in cash. Hence, £1,000 wasn't a number that she was bothered with. Audrey had originally asked Mr. Fool to extend the payment period of the £2,000 to February or March in order, on the one hand, to pay off her debt to Viscount Glaint, and to save up money as discreetly as possible without arousing suspicion. On the other hand, she had to set aside an additional budget for the ingredients of the psychiatrist potion. Now was the time to use the budget. At most, I'll have to tighten my belt like how I did for the past few months. After March, there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey thought, not troubled at all. She agreed. She agreed. Furs was both happy and confused. Furs asked Mr. Fool to bear witness to the transaction and arranged for Miss Justice to make the payment first before she delivered the Beyonder ingredient on Wednesday. As Furs decided to head for Pritz Harbor immediately upon receiving the cash, without wasting any time in the middle, she looked at the three gentlemen, the sun, the hanged man, and the world. Does anyone have any information on the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch? After calming down, she discovered that with her experience in the acting method, she could digest the excess Beyonder characteristic much faster than she had expected. 1 week was almost equivalent to 2 weeks of the past. In about 10 days, she would be able to completely digest and resolve the problem. When she gathers the ingredients and advances to Trick Master, she felt that she would be able to perfectly pass the first test given by her teacher, Dorian. She would gain more attention and would no longer be a mere student who was taken in out of gratitude. Derek nodded and said, I was just about to tell you that during this exploration, we obtained some Spirit Eater stomach pouches. I can exchange it at low prices after I return to the City of Silver. That's under the premise that I'm no longer under surveillance. Okay, but it seems that you have no use for gold pounds? Furs asked directly. After the operation to save Little Sun, she had a preliminary understanding of the City of Silver. Without waiting for the Sun to say a word, Alger interjected, you can hand me the corresponding cash or gold coins to me. 300 pounds is a very reasonable price. I will provide the Solar High Priest potion formula to the Sun. Mr. Hanged Man, you have the formula to Solar High Priest? Derek asked in pleasant surprise. During his previous patrols and his recent explorations, he had increasingly felt that the powers of the Sun pathway were perfect for dealing with the dark. Although the giant pathway's sequence 6 Dawn Paladin could already create the light of dawn, in the realm of the holy and light, it's still inferior to a light suppliant. The Hanged Man nodded slightly and said, that's right. He had found the Solar High Priest potion formula in a treasury of the Rorsted Archipelago, but it was only recently that he had found an opportunity to provide sufficient justification and have the sufficient conditions to have the right to read it once. The reason that he gave was that people suspected to be priests of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun had appeared on the Sonia Sea, and since he was temporarily unable to return to the Intis Republic, he could only search for the potion ingredients corresponding to Solar High Priest. Moreover, the hatred for the Eternal Blazing Sun could turn mere rumors into the basis for action by the Church of the Lord of Storms. Derek was delighted at first, but he soon said with some awkwardness, the value of the Sequence 7 potion formula is higher than a Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. I don't have the gold pounds all of you were talking about. You can repay it with ingredients of the same value, the Hanged Man gave a terse response. But I don't know what I can get from you. First, you should make a list of the common monsters found around the City of Silver and their corresponding ingredients. I'll then choose from that list. No problem. After this exploration is over, I will do it as quickly as possible. Derek was visibly relieved. By the side, Klein wanted to facepalm, but in the end, he didn't manipulate the world to break the deal. It was because he also wanted to know what kind of monsters and ingredients were common around the City of Silver. As Audrey secretly sighed, the Hanged Man looked around and raised his request. I need a pair of dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. I'll pay the necessary compensation. He only mentioned the dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. In other words, Mr. Hanged Man has clues regarding the blue shadow falcon's crystalline feathers. He really does have many channels and resources. Audrey, who had seen the potion formula for Wind Blessed, thought with some enlightenment. After the transactions came to an end, they began to freely exchange information about their areas, and the end of the tarot gathering quickly approached. During the process, the world inquired for clues about mermaids and obtained an answer similar to the one he had received from Sharon. When everything was over, Klein, who had been watching quietly, thought it necessary to warn Miss Justice and Miss Magician. A terrifying object that is suspected to be a Grade 0 sealed artifact has appeared around Prince Edisac. It might even involve 0-08, which would definitely not be a simple matter. Furthermore, the last time a similar situation occurred, Tingen City had faced the threat of an evil god spawn, and it had almost disappeared from the map. Hence, now there's also a hidden danger in Backlund. Klein thought for a few seconds, making the world say in a hoarse voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have recently received some information that a major event is brewing in Backlund. This will bring about a great deal of unrest and may lead to a tragedy." What's the major event? Audrey asked with concern. Unknowingly, her brow had begun to slightly furrow. I don't know. The world shook his head calmly. Where would the element of unrest and the possible tragedy come from? Furs asked nervously. From the previous gatherings, she had confirmed that Mr. World's sources were trustworthy. The world acted stumped as he shook his head and said, "There's contradictory information, making it impossible for me to give a definite answer." Upon saying this, he looked up and earnestly cast his gaze towards the figure within the grey fog at the end of the model table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, your adorer in Backland must have detected something, right?" Everyone's eyes immediately focused towards the end of the long bronze table, with everyone feeling different feelings: curiosity, worry, anticipation, and tenseness. With the attention on him, Klein leaned back and said in a casual tone, "Edisac Augustus." Chapter 464, Consultation. Prince Edisac Augustus? What connection does he have with the danger that might lead to tragedy? Moreover, this matter seems to have received the attention of Mr. Fool. Audrey instantly matched the name with a face, giving rise to great worry and doubt in her. In her opinion, things that caught the attention of Mr. Fool were either very dangerous, extremely secretive, or had far-reaching importance, and were by no means simple. For example, the true creator had attempted to descend upon Backland with the help of Lenivus and the harsh conditions of Eastborough's factory district, Emperor Roselle's Dark Emperor card, or the death of the Duke Negan, and the Twilight Hermit Order. Taking these examples into account, Audrey had good reason to believe that, if not handled well, or given too little attention, the major event involving Prince Edisac would inevitably lead to a very, very terrible storm. Yes. Prince Edisac hasn't bothered me for quite some time, and I was only relieved by that and didn't think too much about it. Now, it does seem a little problematic. At the previous ball, he still warmly kept me back to discuss some boring topics, trying his hand at pompous bad humor. But just 2 or 3 days after that, he turned rather cold and had even deliberately avoided me. I have to find a chance to ask Father about him, but I can't show too much curiosity, or else it might be very possible that he would agree to the royal family's marriage request. Audrey recalled some details, and she suddenly felt her shoulders sink from the weight. She had never liked Prince Edisac, including his 2 elder brothers, and she had no intention of becoming a princess consort. As for the reason, it was very simple. The followers of the Evernight goddess couldn't accept that the Augustus family had believed in the Lord of Storms for generations, which meant their arrogance, pomposity, contempt, and eccentricity against women had penetrated deep into their bones. It was hard to change them, which was the one thing Audrey couldn't tolerate the most. When she thought of the strict, ancient, and extremely conservative environment she would find herself in after becoming a princess consort, Audrey felt that she would surely go crazy and flee, disregarding everything else. So, she wasn't moved at all by the rather solicitous flattery of the princes. She was even very repulsed. Edisac Augustus. The last name implies that he's a member of the royal family. I vaguely remember that he's a prince. What dangerous matter is he going to do? I have no way of coming into contact with him. Right, I can ask Miss Audrey and Viscount Glaint for help, but I have to think of a reason ahead of time to prevent any suspicion from them. Furs frowned slightly as she interpreted Mr. Fool's words. Alger was very interested in the matter, but he didn't dare to ask Mr. Fool, who was obviously just providing a hint. He could only ponder to himself for 2 seconds before saying to Justice, the magician, and the world, "The atmosphere over the sea isn't calm either. It might have a connection with Backland, just like those machines." His words were completely baseless. He simply wanted to exaggerate the degree of the danger and let the 3 Tarot Club members in Backland investigate it diligently. I have to say that Mr. Hanged Man has acted in concert so well. Klein, who was watching from the sidelines, gave up on the idea of having the world say something similar. He only mentioned Prince Edisac, but not the lady with the sapphire ring who was suspected of having a Grade 0 sealed artifact. He didn't even mention the possibility that the matter Prince Edisac might be involved in had to do with 0-08 and in Zangwill because he didn't know the circumstances of the top sealed artifact that could even destroy a country. All he could rely on were minute clues to make guesses that he wasn't completely sure of. He was afraid that if he directly told the key points to Justice and Miss Magician, their investigations would be detected by the target the moment they honed in on the target. This was also why Klein didn't try to find an opportunity to inform the machinery hive mind. Based on his guesses about sealed artifact 0-08, he suspected that if he left Minsk Street and rode a horse carriage to the Lever Cathedral or the Steam Cathedral, he would encounter an unexpected and absolutely unstoppable attack, such as the eruption of a sealed artifact hidden underground or a fatal strike of a high-sequence Beyonder. Only the screening of the gray fog allowed Klein to not worry about such problems. To a certain extent, he could inform Justice and the magician about this through a more gentle, more roundabout, and more veiled manner. In addition, Klein had other plans. It was to leave Backland by bowing out the stage as a side character among side characters and changing his appearance without anyone noticing. He would then secretly return and contact the machinery hive mind in a manner beyond the Grade 0 sealed artifact senses. Let's hope this will succeed. I hope there's a chance of finding in Sanguine. Yes, the premise is that he is indeed involved in this matter. Wait a minute, while Mr. Azek was after in Sanguine, he had a conflict with MI9. He became secretly wanted, and MI9 has always been considered to be a pro-royal faction in the military. A series of coincidences revolving Prince Edisak is rather similar to the features displayed by sealed artifact 0-08 in the past. This seems to indirectly confirm Sanguine's existence. Klein closed his eyes, and the bright boots and pale hand flashed back to him. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving upward. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall meet next week. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring blankly at her reflection. There were good news and bad news for her at this tarot gathering. The good news was that she was about to receive one of the psychiatrist potion's main ingredients. Although she was no longer the ignorant girl who had bought some basic general knowledge from the hanged man for £1,000 and knew the approximate price of a lot of Beyonder ingredients, she didn't mind paying a premium for the eyes of a mirror dragon. After Duke Negan's assassination, she gained the desire and motivation to raise her sequence to receive the corresponding combat strength. For this, she didn't want to wait any longer and was willing to pay a price. As long as the ingredients appeared, she would immediately accept the offer as long as the price wasn't too outrageous, in case something unexpected happened. It's like a precious piece of jewelry that many noble ladies have set their eyes on. It's also like the purebred houses with unique bloodlines that men like. The corresponding premium is inevitable and unavoidable. At times, it's not impossible to have the price double or triple. Besides, with Furs busying herself in the process of contacting her teacher, she definitely shouldn't be left wasting her time while taking on risks. Yes. She also doesn't know that I'm Justice. Audrey thought indifferently. As for the bad news, it was no doubt related to the matter of Prince Edisak. It left her concerned and worried. Fortunately, Mr. World received the news, and Mr. Fool had provided a warning. Otherwise, who knows how things would have turned out. Audrey, with such excellent conditions, you could certainly solve this problem. Come on. The girl drew the sign of the crimson moon against the reflection in the mirror and tried hard to be optimistic. Then, she restrained her emotions and headed out to the piano room, preparing to participate in her scheduled piano lesson as if nothing had happened. This was because Earl Hall and his wife, as well as Hibbert Hall, wouldn't be home until dinner, and she had no one to ask for information now. She could only tell herself to be calm, to be composed, and to be patient. Before the tutor arrived, Audrey casually played the piano, using the beautiful melody to cleanse her mind and soul. When she finished playing, she noticed that Susie had opened the door at some point and was sitting beside her. She still had a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hanging around her neck. Audrey, what problems did you encounter? The sound of your piano tells me that you're frustrated over something, Susie said suddenly. Audrey froze, not knowing how to reply. She suddenly felt that having a mind-reading dog at home wasn't necessarily a good thing. Within the campsite that had a lit bonfire. With his eyes closed, Derek Berg thought back quietly to what had happened at the tarot gathering and made sure that he hadn't forgotten the memories of his repeated experiences. After an unknown period of time, he opened his eyes, which were brimming with anticipation, and looked around. However, what entered into his eyes were flames and his teammates, who were exactly the same as in his memories. At that moment, the cross-legged demon hunter Colin, who was leaning against a stone pillar, said, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." At this moment, Derek was sure that everything that had happened before wasn't a dream or a hallucination. Sherwood Borough. 15 Minsk Street. Klein went down to the first floor and sat in the activity room, feeling the warmth of the fireplace. He quietly rocked in the reclining chair without reading the newspapers, magazines, or even books. It was all so peaceful and silent until he heard the ringing of his doorbell. Klein, who was wearing a house shirt and cashmere vest, got up and walked towards the door. The visitor took him by surprise. He opened the door and chuckled. "Good afternoon, Emlyn. Aren't you supposed to be helping at the Harvest Church at this hour?" It was the handsome, somewhat effeminate, vampire Emlyn White, whose hair was combed back at an angle. The arrogant man's expression froze when he heard Klein's greeting. It took him a bit of effort to recover his composure. "I have something to consult with you, Detective." "Sherlock Moriarty." Emlyn enunciated one word at a time. After inviting him into the activity room, Klein returned to his reclining chair and asked with a smile, "What is it?" "The fee for a consultation is £1, but the consultation cannot exceed an hour." Emlyn White didn't pay attention to his words, and he said while deep in thought, "A big shot wants me to do something. Although that matter can help me solve my problem indirectly, it also contains a great amount of risk. I don't have any friends, and I'm afraid my parents will be worried, and you're a very knowledgeable Beyonder detective. What do you suggest? Reject or accept? Solve your problem? Clearing the psychological cue?" Klein said thoughtfully, "I can't give you any advice with just the word something." Emlyn White fell silent for a few seconds before he clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "It has something to do with that fool, huh?" Klein almost lifted his hand to his ear. Chapter 465, Emlyn's determination. After a second of confirmation, Klein clasped his hands together and leaned forward. "What exactly is this something?" "No, I can't say any further." Emlyn White shook his head firmly. Afraid of being probed, Klein didn't pursue the matter. He simply analyzed the situation based on the information that the vampire had just revealed. Something to do with the fool. It can help Emlyn White resolve his problem. Contains a high risk. Combined with his previous ideas, this seems to indicate that he intended to hold an appropriate ritual to pray to the fool, which is also me, so as to eliminate the psychological cue and gain his long-awaited freedom. However, this is no longer a ritual that Emlyn will be holding himself. It's a result of a particular big shot's instructions, and with this vampire's pride, for him to address the person that way, it most likely means that the person is a powerhouse among the Sanguine. Why would a Sanguine big shot send a descendant to pray to the fool? Have they started working with the Aurora Order? Confused, Klein looked up at the expectant Emlyn and scoffed to himself. "Try guessing if I'll respond to your prayers." He hesitated for 2 seconds and didn't make a suggestion. Instead, he said, "Statistically speaking, when praying to a hidden existence without understanding the situation, 30 out of 100 cases would not receive any response. 68 cases will end up encountering all sorts of terrible things and cause them to lose their lives, or live a life worse than death. Only 2 cases have the possibility of success, allowing them to get what they want, but the price they pay might not be what they want." As a former keyboard warrior, Klein had always believed that when it came to proving something or reinforcing a point of view, anyone who just gave an example, an exception, without mentioning the entire sample and overall statistics was being an asshole. It was merely a trick of concept, and in these cases, there were usually similar companion words, such as, "I have a friend, a girl I know," or "someone around me." Therefore, to convince Emlyn White, he deliberately fabricated some data. Of course, this wasn't entirely baseless. At least, many of the files which Klein had read while he was a member of a Nighthawks team had described similar situations. Only 2 cases of success. Problems happened to 68 cases? Startled, Emlyn couldn't help but lift his hand to smooth his hair. Basically, that is the level of danger over the matter you're going to do. If you have malicious intentions, the risk is even higher than this, Klein replied sincerely. Emlyn shook his head subconsciously. No, there's no malice. Besides, the big shot will protect me in the process. No malice? Even if you have malice, you might not know since you're just cannon fodder who has been pushed to the front lines. Klein raised his right palm and strengthened his tone with a gesture. This will reduce the risk by a lot, but it definitely won't reduce it to zero. Does that big shot really have the means to resist a hidden existence? Probably not, Emlyn answered haltingly. So? Klein spread his hands. He suddenly revealed a smile and said, Emlyn, there is no need for you to take this risk. Even if you completely believe in Earth Mother, it will not affect your life in any way. Look at the citizens of Fainapotter, don't they eat, dress, and do whatever they want? When the time comes, there's a high chance that Father Yutravsky will no longer force you to do volunteer work at the Harvest Church. You will regain your original freedom. Furthermore, I believe that you have adapted well to the teachings of Earth Mother without any contradictions. Emlyn White remained silent for a while and said, being a believer because I like her beliefs is completely different from being forcefully turned into a believer through a psychological cue. Even if I do abandon the moon one day and believe in Earth Mother, I also hope that it is a choice that I freely made. It has nothing to do with others, this is the last pride of a Sanguine. Klein looked at Emlyn with some surprise. He hadn't expected him to be so insistent. He considered for 2 seconds and didn't try to persuade him again by giving a terse acknowledgement. The problem is actually very simple, that is, do you have the courage to face a certain degree of danger because of the orders of the big shot and the temptation to get rid of the queue? If you're willing to sacrifice your life for this, then the answer is extremely simple. In short, this matter will ultimately be left to you to decide. Emlyn listened with a heavy expression, and he instinctively retorted, if I really choose to make the attempt, it's definitely not for myself, but for all Sanguine. Resolving this problem is just an additional perk. For all Sanguine? What matter of mine involves all Sanguine? That big shot was lying to you, right? Klein sneered. Do you believe that a weak vampire has the chance to save an entire race? Sanguine. Emlyn emphasized. Moreover, my strength isn't bad either. It's equivalent to sequence 7 of you humans. By the way, it's the kind that specializes in combat. As for whether you believe it or not, you wouldn't understand. He stood up and said, although your analysis and suggestions are meaningless, I still have to thank you. The consultation fee will be deducted from the previous suitcase and tin box. Huh? Klein wasn't able to react for a moment to what he was talking about. It was only when Emlyn had left that he suddenly realized what he meant. Aren't the vessels in large transactions usually free? That petty and stingy vampire. In the darkness, in which the frequency of lightning had yet to resume, the exploratory team from the City of Silver punctually arrived at the periphery of the abandoned temple. Derek remembered that during their first operation, all the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished here. The entire team fell into pure darkness, and he had also heard the creepy cry for help coming from the depths of the temple. According to the conjectures from Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice, this might be the starting point for our repeated cycles. But why would we wake up in the campsite outside the city and not directly here? Remembering the discussion at the tarot meeting, Derek raised his arm and prayed secretly, as suggested. A pure light suddenly burst out from his body, causing Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team to quickly assume battle positions. What happened? Demon Hunter Colin drew his sword and asked in a deep voice. Derek looked left and right in horror and said, Your Excellency, I just heard a child crying, save me, save me. He wanted to test if this was a key point. And now? Colin asked warily. I don't hear it anymore. Derek listened carefully. Demon Hunter Colin glanced at Joshua and the others from the corner of his eye. Did any of you hear it? No. The exploratory team members shook their heads. After pondering for a few seconds, Colin came to a decision. He took out a dark blue metal bottle from the secret compartment in his belt and smeared the colorless, viscous liquid on his sword. Then, he stabbed upwards with his sword. Suddenly, the sky lit up. Streaks of silver, snake-like beams started to surge upwards, quickly spreading in all directions. The silver-white light instantly enveloped all the members of the exploratory team, as if illuminating the darkest corner of every single one of them. With a sizzling sound, the silver serpents drilled into the void, heading off into the unknown. Everything calmed down very quickly, leaving only the dim light of the animal hide lanterns scattered in silence. Colin narrowed his eyes. Whatever he attempted had sensed something unknown. After a full 5 seconds, he raised his hand and pointed forward. From now on, we can't afford to be careless. We have to be on full alert. Such familiar words. This isn't the key to breaking out of this predicament. Derek calmed his heart and followed the team into the half-deserted temple without any delay. This time, he learned his lesson and didn't look at the face of the fallen creator. In the process of inspecting the ground, he managed to get himself to investigate the area where the mural was by being proactive. He held on to the animal hide lantern and the axe of hurricane in his hands as he and one of his teammates began to take action as a small team. He finally reached his destination after passing through a series of mottled and crumbling walls. As the light from the animal hide lantern grew closer, the mural on the wall gradually became clearer. Derek first looked towards the corner and found the strange, memorable line of words. Rose Redemption. He silently chanted the name, raised the animal hide lantern, and carefully examined the details of the mural. On the highest area of the mottled wall was a huge, blurry, pitch-black cross. A shadow that was difficult to discern was hanging upside down on it. Against such a backdrop, there was a desolate plain. In the plains, there was a long line of people. Their destination was a distant mountain, the cross on top of the mountain, and the figure hanging upside down. Within the line, some of the people were kneeling on the ground, praying devoutly. Others had already stood up and were walking forward while facing a raging wind. Their faces were simple sketches, as though it was trying to highlight their tattered clothing. Only the leader at the front was relatively clearer. It was a tall and thin man with long, silver hair reaching his back. This man had soft facial features, his head was lowered, and his eyes were tightly shut. There were layers upon layers of wings of light on his back. Angel. A legendary angel. Derek observed the situation around the leader with excitement. Soon, he discovered a meandering, rippling river beneath the feet of the seemingly angelic man. The river kept twisting and turning, and it led back into itself, becoming the source. A cycle. This creates a cycle. Derek felt that he had caught on to something important. In the cycles of experiences, there was actually a circular river in the mural on the wall. The latter was obviously hinting or revealing something. Derek looked up and saw the silver-haired angel with an uncountable number of wings. There was a touch of indifference in the gentleness of his face, as though he was looking down at a river, looking down at fate. Is this the true meaning behind Mr. Fool's hint? Derek thought for a moment and decided to give it a try. If he succeeded, he planned on blaming all his anomalies on the boy, Jack. If he failed, no one would remember what he had done. Under the stunned gaze of his teammates, Derek raised the axe of hurricane and viciously slashed at the river in the mural. The lightning that had just flashed by was triggered, and the silver light fell onto the axe. Chapter 466, Tail-devourer Bam. Derek's axe, wrapped in streaks of silver, struck the river in the mural, causing the wall to cave in and stone chips to fly everywhere. With one strike, the river that had its source connected to its mouth completely disintegrated. Just as he was looking forward to having the cycle broken, resulting in the members of the exploratory team escaping the temple, Demon Hunter Colin's figure phased away and appeared before him, his face grim. What were you doing? The tip of the demigod's sword was still pointed downwards, but the grip on his hilt was clearly tighter than before. Thinking back to the collective wisdom of the Tarot Club members, Derek said, half doubtfully and half fearfully, Your Excellency, a black shadow flashed past here just now. It's true. It looked like the figure of a child. Without looking away, Colin Iliad asked another team member, Hyam, did you see it? The exploratory team member named Hyam subconsciously moved closer to the chief, firmly shook his head, and said, No, I didn't see anything. Colin's light blue eyes immediately glowed, revealing two complex dark green symbols. He watched Derek in this state for 4 to 5 seconds. Finally, he withdrew his gaze and said in a normal tone, This is your first exploration mission. Hallucinations due to being nervous is normal. Subsequently, you are to stay by my side. I think you'll be calmer this way. Yes, Your Excellency, Derek agreed without any hesitation. Having just made an attempt, he confirmed that the mural wasn't critical. The rose redemption that Mr. Fool suggested likely hides a deeper meaning. It's not that simple. Derek walked silently beside Chief Colin with the axe of Hurricane in hand. What happened afterward wasn't much different from the explorations he remembered from his previous explorations. Everyone repeated the events in the past and arrived at the final hall with an altar for the 6th time. There, they found the yellow-haired boy, Jack, curled up in the shadows. Upon hearing, Save me, and seeing the silhouette of the child, Demon Hunter Colin nodded his head indiscernibly and retracted most of the attention he had placed on Derek Berg. Just as he was deliberating his words, Derek suddenly asked, How can we save you? Jack revealed an excited expression. Save me, send me home. Send me home. Where is your home? Derek asked, curious and frightened. Seeing this, Colin shut his mouth and tightened his grip. Jack raised his hand weakly and said, My home is at Enmat Harbor. Enmat Harbor. Although Mr. Hanged Man never mentioned it, from the word, harbor, Jack really doesn't belong to this place of ours. It's very likely that he comes from the outside world, from the Lone Kingdom where Miss Justice and the others are located. Derek was overjoyed, unable to hide his excitement. His reaction didn't arouse any suspicion from Demon Hunter Colin, because this powerful chief of the 6-member council had also never seen the sea. He could only read from the preserved books that this body of water was many times larger than a lake, as well as the term, harbor. The words that came out of the strange boy's mouth presented itself like a painting of a new world in front of Colin. This made him, who was desperately searching for the future of the City of Silver, forget about anything else as he blurted out, How did you, or you and your companions, get here? Jack showed a reminiscing expression. My father and I first traveled by boat, then we met up with his companions and continued on the voyage. After a huge storm, the rest of us touched ground and followed the direction of the Lord's gaze and came all the way here. Followed the direction of the Lord's gaze? Demon Hunter Colin and the others looked at the deity statue in unison, trying to determine where he was staring at. Soon, Colin was able to determine some general information. They had proceeded in the direction of where the statue was looking at. That is to say, as soon as we reverse the process, we can find the shore and the place where they landed. The opposite direction of his gaze is the map around the City of Silver, which was gradually being perfected through continuous explorations, appeared in Colin's mind, allowing him to come up with a preliminary sketch of the route of the boy's journey. If there are no other temples in the middle and no corresponding statues, extrapolating it all the way would pass through the ruins of the Giant King's court. Colin's pupils suddenly contracted. That was the palace that once housed the ancient god, Giant King Ormer. It wasn't too far away from the City of Silver. The descendants of the Kingdom of Silver, who had been ruled by the giants for generations, knew exactly where the ruins were located, but they were still unable to complete their exploration of the area because it was extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than the pure darkness. According to Colin's extrapolations, the unfamiliar boy and his party had passed through the ruins of the Giant King's court before arriving here. How did they do it? Perhaps they didn't take a completely direct path, and they circled around the Giant King's court. Regardless, there's a path that leads to the sea behind the Giant King's court. And on the other end of the sea might be a human kingdom. Is that the hope of the City of Silver? Colin couldn't help resisting the thought. At this moment, Derek acutely noticed that the clothes on the boy's chest and abdomen were dyed dark red, as though some kind of liquid was slowly seeping out. "Are you hurt?" he cautiously asked. Jack lowered his head and replied in an erratic tone, "Something ugly is growing there." As he spoke, he took off his clothes, revealing his bare chest. It was inlaid with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It wasn't painted nor was it made of gems. They were real eyes, a real nose, and a real mouth in the purest sense of the word. Furthermore, they didn't seem to belong to one particular face but that of 3 people. All of a sudden, Derek imagined a scene in which Jack had used the remnants of his companions after eating them, their eyes, nose, and mouth, to form a strange face on his chest. The face was gentle and indifferent, giving Derek an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. It took only a second or two for Derek to figure out the reason for the familiarity. The face was very much like the angel in the mural above them, the silver-haired angel with his feet over the circular river. Sure enough, the reason we keep repeating the exploration is because of him. A thought struck Derek, and he blurted out a single word, as though he was going to blurt the incantation to extricate himself from the predicament. "Rose Redemption," he solemnly shouted. Jack raised his head and stared at him, his mouth slowly grinning wide before reaching his ears. "I'm so hungry. So hungry." Derek froze as he saw a fierce battle ensue. When he regained consciousness, he found himself sitting by the bonfire in the campsite again. Rose Redemption isn't the incantation. He began to reflect deeply. The 7th exploration soon began. Derek, who had made an attempt, no longer behaved strangely, but he proactively sought to investigate the Rose Redemption mural. As usual, the exploratory team entered the underground hall with the altar and the deity statue. They found the obviously strange little boy, Jack. After a similar conversation, Derek once again saw the human face that had been pieced together with the facial features of other people. Now experienced, he didn't take any actions which could agitate the boy. He lowered his voice and said to Demon Hunter Colin, "Your Excellency, the face on his chest is very similar to the angel in the mural above us. It's the angel with silver hair whose feet are above a river that is connected from mouth to source. Yes, the mural which is labeled Rose Redemption, at the corner." Colin was taken aback at first before he frowned. As he paid attention and consoled Jack, he sized up Derek from the corner of his eye. After a few seconds of silence, he said with a suppressed voice, "Due to you mentioning this matter, you made me think of certain things." Without waiting for Derek to ask, he continued, "We've been studying this mural for a very long period of time and only believe that it depicts an angel leading a group of ascetics on a pilgrimage. And perhaps this group's name is Rose Redemption. The river, that runs from source to mouth, represents a cycle, and our interpretation of it is that this pilgrimage takes place over and over again. And now it may be that it is used to identify the angel. That's the idea you gave me, as a mon used to hide in your body." "Why?" Derek was at a loss. Demon Hunter Colin stared at Jack and said, "The worm left behind by Amon had the symbol of time, and a circular river is often related to fate. Putting the two together, it reminded me of a few books that mention something that I'm unsure of their credibility. When the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, cast his attention on this world, he had many angels around him. Among them were leaders of the angels, kings of angels that were closest to being a god. There were a total of 8 of them, and some of their names have already been lost to history. There are still records of others, perhaps simple or detailed. Legend has it that the sons of God were among these 8 kings of angels. Among them, 2 kings of angels had the titles Angel of Time and Angel of Fate. Derek was immediately enlightened as he asked for confirmation. "You believe that Amon is the Angel of Time and that the mural is depicting the Angel of Fate?" "I can't be sure for now. Only the title Angel of Time has been passed down. As for the Angel of Fate, the records are relatively detailed." Colin suddenly took a deep breath. Immediately, he solemnly said, "Angel of Fate, Tail-devourer Ouroboros." In the evening, within the Odora family's underground structure. Emlyn White looked at the iron-black coffin and said to the ancient Sanguine inside, "Lord Nibs, I accept the ancestors' mission." Nibs replied in his aged voice, "Very good. When do you want to begin? Do you have any wishes that remain unfulfilled?" Upon hearing Lord Nibs asking about his last wishes, Emlyn White's calves went limp, and he almost regretted it. He stiffened his neck and said, "There's no need. We can begin now." Chapter 467, The Delayed Response. The iron-black coffin with its strange patterns lay quietly in the center, and there seemed to be hidden shockwaves in the air that seemed to be silently colliding. Emlyn White stood in the corner and lit the candles according to the normal ritual procedures, burning the essential oils and corresponding herbal powders. A dense and unsteady atmosphere emanated, and after recalling the requirements of artificial sleepwalking, Emlyn lowered his head, began to enter cogitation, and repeated the honorific name of the fool. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Amidst his monotone voice, Emlyn gradually entered a magical state. His body felt relaxed and reserved. It felt like he was in deep sleep, but his spirituality was light and energetic as it constantly spread outwards. At this moment, he had a feeling that he was continuously drifting upwards. In the ancient palace above the gray fog, Klein was sitting at the end of the long bronze table, tapping his fingers on the rippling light screen to his side. He was expressionlessly watching the praying figure in amusement. Although it was vague, Klein could tell at a glance that it was vampire Emlyn White. Very courageous, having the drive akin to buying a doll. Klein sighed and didn't respond. He had previously tried to divine the purpose of the Sanguines, but he was unable to obtain any effective revelations. The only thing he was sure of was that it had nothing to do with the Aurora Order. This piqued Klein's curiosity, but he wouldn't take the risk of responding to Emlyn White when a lofty Sanguine was beside Emlyn. He didn't know if he could grasp traces of the mysterious space above the gray fog and threaten it like blasphemer Amon. He had no intention to confirm it since he was dealing with an avatar of Amon back then. Yet, he was now facing a powerful Sanguine's true body. There's no need to take risks on matters of no importance, even if I want to know the real purpose of the Sanguines. And it's not like there's no other way. Klein looked at Emlyn White in his state of artificial sleepwalking. He said to himself with a smile, "I can delay my response." He planned to wait until tomorrow or the day after. He would suddenly respond when Emlyn White was without protection and when the Sanguine had given up. However, there was a premise, which was to first use divination to confirm the degree of danger. Tail-devourer. Just like that river? Derek Berg suddenly thought of something. Demon Hunter Colin solemnly nodded. Yes. It means that we may have stepped into a river that runs from its mouth to source, preventing our departure. Fortunately, this should only be remnants of that angel of fate's power. He isn't hiding here. No, it's definitely certain, and it has long since been the case. Derek silently said to himself. At this moment, Colin took out a dark red metal tube. He unscrewed the cap and gulped it down. His light blue eyes quickly turned lighter, tinged with silver. In the end, his pupils seemed to turn vertical, reflecting Jack's figure. A few sparks of silver light lit up in his eyes. They circled or collided at random in an extremely intense manner. Ding! Demon Hunter Colin first stabbed his sword into the ground, and with a flip of his hand, he pulled out his other sword, smearing it with golden, sun-like oil. Noticing this action, Jack's expression immediately changed, as if he was shrouded in a thick shadow. Before he could open his mouth, Demon Hunter Colin moved. He pulled out his sword from the ground, leaving behind a blurry figure. The golden and silver light shone brightly, illuminating the entire underground hall. The light before the little boy was the most intense. After a mournful scream, the darkness once again shrouded the altar. Jack stood in his original spot, without taking even a step. However, the face on his chest had disappeared, leaving behind only a hole where his pulsating internal organs could be seen. A few meters to Jack's side, Demon Hunter Colin genuflected, his two swords hanging down at an angle. In front of him, the face was torn apart, reduced to scattered eyes, a nose, and a mouth. These organs spasmed and bounced like electric shocks, and soon they were still, rotting rapidly like they were supposed to. In an instant, Derek felt an invisible, aqueous barrier around him silently shatter. Almost at the same time, he seemed to have left the swift river and returned to the bank. Looking at the gloomy underground hall and the upside-down deity statue, and at Jack, who had a distorted expression and had fainted due to the pain, Derek felt a sense of joy and relief. He knew that he and the others had finally escaped the cycle of repeating their lives. Derek was well aware that although the final solution didn't seem complicated, it might have taken dozens or hundreds of repeated attempts to find the clues and solution, without knowing any clues or the problem beforehand. In the process, the slightest carelessness could lead to death, and Derek had no way of knowing if a life that was lost could experience a redo, or if they would still revive by the bonfire but would end up dead after escaping this predicament. What's even more serious is that people would always repeat the same choice, which was to say that they wouldn't be able to discover the problem in the first place. Without the corresponding memories and experience, they wouldn't detect any abnormalities even if it was the 1,000th time, and they would completely lose themselves in the circular river until they reached the end of their lives due to the normal flow of time in the outside world. At the thought of such a possibility, Derek thanked Mr. Fool wholeheartedly for restoring his memory and giving him a hint. Turning his head to the side, he saw that Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team didn't show any abnormal reactions as they checked the surrounding area in a way that was similar to the sixth exploration. Perhaps it will only be after returning to the City of Silver that they would realize that they've lost a part of their lives from the difference in dates. Derek thought silently. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin stood up, walked back to the boy's side, and took out another small metal bottle. He then poured the thick black liquid inside onto the boy's empty chest. The liquid quickly condensed into a translucent membrane, sticking to the wound and stopping the flow of blood. "Hi, Joshua, the both of you are in charge of him," Colin suppressed his throbbing hand and ordered in a low voice. To him, this was the City of Silver's hope for ridding the curse and defeating the prophecy of the apocalypse. Phew. Derek wanted to covertly thank the fool, but he realized that there was no corresponding prayer gesture. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, the sumptuous dinner glistened under the light of the candles in an alluring manner. Unlike what was imagined in the newspapers and magazines, the dinner for a great aristocratic family wasn't serious, and there was no need for silence. This was a rare occasion for family members to gather together. While eating, they would casually chat about a variety of relaxed topics in order to communicate and solidify their relationship. Audrey sliced a piece of steak which was produced from her ranch, observed Earl Hall's expression, and, without hiding her curiosity, she asked, "Father, did something happen to Prince Edisac recently?" If nothing had happened, then her plan was to pretend that she had heard irresponsible rumors that didn't correspond to reality. It wasn't uncommon for this to happen among the aristocracy. Earl Hall paused, raised his eyebrows, and asked, "What did you hear?" "There really is something." Gleaning information from her father's reaction, Audrey replied with a faint smile, "Some rumors, but they seem to be true." Earl Hall rubbed his temples and said, "It's not a very serious matter. Audrey, I know what you're thinking, so I don't have to hide it from you. This involves a relatively ordinary scandal of the royal family. To put it simply, Prince Edisac has fallen in love with a commoner girl. This led to the death of an aristocratic descendant. The royal family has blocked the spread of this matter, not wanting to cause too much of a commotion." His wife took a sip of champagne and said, "It seems he isn't mature enough." Mother is being very tactful with her criticism. It does sound suspicious. Has Prince Edisac really gotten himself involved in a dangerous situation that would bring about terrible changes to Backlund? Audrey put on a look of sudden understanding and said with a smile, "This makes me wonder, why would the story of freedom and love involve the death of an aristocratic descendant?" Hibbert Hall kept his head lowered while slicing the tender steak and guessed with great interest, "It reminds me of the complicated love stories that are so common among the believers of the Lord of Storms. It's very common to fight for honor and for a lady. It's a tradition that has been placed into a museum. Earl Hall denied his eldest son's statement. Audrey seized the opportunity and thoughtfully said, I don't think Prince Edisac is that kind of person, and rumors have already proliferated. Maybe that's not what they really want to cover up. Perhaps not. Earl Hall ruminated over these words, unconsciously frowning. Knowing when to stop, Audrey didn't say anything else, and she naturally led the conversation in a different direction. She planned on probing her other noble friends about the matter. As a girl that Prince Edisac had once courted, it was absolutely normal for her to want to know the details of the matter. Whether it was curiosity or indignation, they were enough to motivate people to make such an attempt. Being unable to maintain a state of artificial sleepwalking for long, Emlyn White returned to reality in exhaustion. Opening his eyes, he stared at the iron-black coffin, then he said with a mixture of relief and disappointment, Lord Nibs, there's no response. After a long moment of silence, Nibs finally said in a rather hoarse voice, Okay. Stay here tonight to prevent any accidents from happening. All right. Emlyn didn't try to insist otherwise. He spent the night in worry and trepidation, but the night was so serene and unremarkable. It silently faded only when Backlund's rare winter sunshine scattered across the window. What bad weather! Emlyn left Odora's villa, lowered his hat, and mumbled while he got onto a rental carriage. His destination was the Harvest Church south of the bridge. After the carriage continued steadily for some time, Emlyn's vision suddenly blurred and he saw an endless grey fog. Then, to his amazement, he found himself in a mysterious and majestic palace, sitting at a long, mottled bronze table. At the very end of the long table, there was a figure shrouded in a thick grey fog, looking down at him from above. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.